The blood came from the plate. Clara hadn't meant to drop it. Her hands had been steady when she carried the dinner tray across the dining room, careful not to let the china rattle, careful not to disturb the perfect arrangement of roasted chicken and glazed carrots that Evelyn had spent the afternoon preparing for the mayor and his wife. Everything had been fine until her stepmother's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Don't shuffle your feet like some common servant." The words made Clara's shoulders tighten. She adjusted her step, tried to glide the way Evelyn always demonstrated. Chin up, spine straight, as if the tray weighed nothing. But her heel caught the edge of the rug just barely, and the plate shifted, just an inch, maybe less. It was enough. The crash seemed impossibly loud in the hushed formality of the dining room. China fragments scattered across the polished floor. Gravy spread in a dark stain across the Persian rug. The mayor's wife gasped. Evelyn's face went perfectly still. "I'm so sorry," Clara whispered, already dropping to her knees, already reaching for the broken pieces. "Leave it." Evelyn's voice was silk over stone. She rose from her chair with practiced grace, her smile never wavering as she addressed their guests. "Please forgive my stepdaughter. She's been unwell lately. Clara, go to your room. I'll handle this." The mayor's wife made sympathetic noises. "Poor dear. These young girls, so delicate." Clara's room. That's what Evelyn called it when others were listening. But they both knew where she was really going. She walked through the kitchen, past the cook who kept her eyes down, past the hallway where family portraits hung in expensive frames. Her father smiled from one of them, handsome and distant, away on business as he always was. He'd be gone another month at least, maybe 2. The cellar door was already open. "I didn't mean to," Clara said, hating how small her voice sounded. Evelyn's hand connected with her cheek before she saw it coming. The force of it sent her stumbling against the doorframe. "Didn't mean to," Evelyn repeated, her voice dropping to that terrible quiet that was somehow worse than shouting. "You never mean to, do you? You never mean to embarrass me. You never mean to make me look like a fool in front of the people who matter in this town. But somehow, Clara, it keeps happening. I'll clean it up. You'll go downstairs and think about what you cost me tonight." The mayor's wife was already hesitant about supporting my charity auction. "Do you know how hard I've worked to earn the respect of this community? To build something meaningful after your mother?" She stopped herself, but the unspoken words hung heavy between them. "After your mother ran off and left your father heartbroken." That was the story everyone knew, the story Evelyn had crafted so carefully. Margaret Whitlock, fragile and unstable, had abandoned her family in the night. Tragic, shameful. A burden Evelyn had graciously agreed to shoulder when she married Clara's father 2 years later. Clara had been 10 when her mother disappeared. Old enough to remember the truth that no one believed. Old enough to know her mother would never have left her, not willingly, not without a fight. But Evelyn had the whole town convinced. Sweet, devoted Evelyn, who'd taken in a troubled child and tried so hard to provide a proper home. If Clara was difficult, well, could anyone blame her after such trauma? The cellar stairs were steep and narrow. Clara descended carefully, her cheeks still burning from the slap. At the bottom, weak moonlight filtered through a small window set high in the stone wall. The space was maybe 10 feet across, crowded with old furniture and forgotten belongings. The air smelled of damp earth and mildew. She found her usual spot in the corner, settling onto the cold floor with her back against the wall. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her skirt until they stilled. This wasn't even the worst punishment, not by far. The cellar was just for minor infractions, small embarrassments, perceived disrespect, the kind of discipline Evelyn could explain away if anyone asked. "Just a time out to help her reflect," she'd say with that concerned smile. The girl needs structure. The worst punishments happened in the privacy of Clara's actual room. Those left marks in places a high-necked dress could hide. Clara had learned not to fight back. Fighting only made it last longer. Crying made Evelyn angrier. The only strategy that worked was to become very still and very quiet, to let her mind drift somewhere else while her body endured whatever came, to disappear from herself until it was over. She'd gotten good at disappearing. Upstairs, floorboards creaked as Evelyn moved through the house. The mayor and his wife would be reassured, charmed, probably invited to stay for dessert. Evelyn was brilliant at hosting, at making people feel welcome and important, at being exactly what they needed her to be. It was Clara's father who taught her that skill, in a way. He'd needed someone to fill the space his wife left behind. Someone to manage the house and represent the family at social functions. Someone to make him look stable and respectable after the scandal of abandonment. Evelyn had been perfect for the role, and she'd been patient. For the first year of the marriage, she'd barely spoken to Clara. Not cruel, not kind, just absent. Clara had been relieved. She missed her mother desperately, but at least her father seemed happier. At least the house felt calm. The shift had been gradual. Small criticisms that seemed helpful at first. Stand up straight, Clara. You'll develop a hump. Don't speak with your mouth full. What would people think? Corrections that seemed reasonable. Maternal, even. Then came the punishments for failures Clara didn't understand. Doors locked from the outside. Meals skipped because she'd been disrespectful, though she couldn't remember how. Slaps that came so fast she learned to flinch before the hand even moved. Always in private. Always carefully controlled. Never where anyone else could see. And whenever her father came home, every few months, smelling of tobacco and train smoke and exhaustion, Evelyn transformed. Warm, affectionate, full of stories about Clara's progress. She's doing so well with her studies, growing into such a lovely young woman. We have our difficult moments, of course, but that's to be expected at her age. Clara had tried to tell him, once. She'd been 12, desperate enough to risk it. Father, please, I need to talk to you about... But Evelyn had been there, smiling, cutting in smoothly. About the piano recital next month. She's been practicing so hard. Haven't you, darling? Later that night, Clara had learned what happened when you tried to break the rules. The bruises had taken weeks to fade. She never tried again. Now, sitting in the cellar at 16, Clara had perfected the art of survival through invisibility. She spoke when spoken to. She moved through the house like a ghost. She excelled at her studies, not because she cared about Latin declensions or European history, but because good grades kept Evelyn satisfied. Because perfection in the things that didn't matter bought her safety in the things that did. The window above her head showed nothing but darkness and stars. She could hear the faint sounds of the dinner party continuing without her. Laughter. The clink of glasses. Evelyn's voice, warm and musical, telling some charming anecdote. Clara closed her eyes and tried to remember her mother's face. It was getting harder. 6 years was a long time. Sometimes she could only recall fragments, the smell of rosewater, the softness of her mother's hands braiding her hair, the sound of humming while hanging laundry in the garden. Had her mother known what would happen? Had she tried to fight? Or had she simply vanished, unable to bear whatever burden had become too heavy? Clara would never know. And that not knowing was its own kind of punishment. She didn't hear the footsteps outside at first. The window was too high and too small to offer much view, just a narrow rectangle of night sky. But something made her look up. A shadow passed across the stars. Clara went very still. Not the frozen stillness of fear, something different, alert, waiting. The shadow moved again, and then a face appeared at the window. A man's face, dark-eyed and weathered, framed by shoulder-length hair that looked like it had been cut with a knife instead of scissors. They stared at each other for a long moment. Clara should have been terrified. Should have screamed or hidden or done something other than meet this stranger's gaze through the grimy glass. But she was too tired for fear, too hollowed out by years of swallowing screams that no one would believe anyway. The man's eyes traveled over her face, taking in details she couldn't see. The red mark on her cheek probably, the way she sat curled in the corner like something wounded. His expression didn't change, didn't soften with pity or harden with judgment. He just looked, really looked. And for the first time in 6 years, Clara felt seen, not as the troubled stepdaughter, not as the girl who'd lost her mother to scandal and madness, not as the embarrassment Evelyn pretended to manage with such noble patience, just as herself, as Clara, as someone whose suffering mattered enough to witness. The moment stretched. Then the man gave a single, deliberate nod, not a greeting, something else, acknowledgement, maybe, or a promise. He disappeared from the window. Clara sat in the darkness, her heart beating faster than it had in years. She didn't know who he was or why he'd been there or what that nod meant, but something had shifted. Some small crack had opened in the careful structure of her invisible prison. Upstairs, the dinner party was winding down. She heard goodbyes being exchanged, the mayor's booming voice thanking Evelyn for a delightful evening. Footsteps crossed the floor above her head. The cellar door opened. "Come up and clean the dining room," Evelyn called down, not bothering to descend. "And don't let me catch you sulking. The Hendersons are staying for coffee." Clara rose stiffly, her legs cramped from sitting. She climbed the stairs carefully, keeping her eyes down as she passed her stepmother in the hallway. The dining room was a disaster. Broken china still littered the floor. The gravy stain had set into the rug. It would take hours to clean properly. She fetched a bucket and rags from the kitchen, working in silence while Evelyn entertained the Hendersons in the parlor. Her movements were automatic, practiced. Sweep the broken pieces into a dustpan without cutting yourself. Blot the stain with cold water first, then soap. Scrub in gentle circles to avoid damaging the fibers. Through the parlor doorway, she could see Evelyn holding court. Mrs. Henderson was a large woman who wore too much jewelry and laughed too loud at everything. Her husband owned the general store and half the commercial buildings in town. Important people, the kind Evelyn collected like trophies. "You're too modest, Evelyn," Mrs. Henderson was saying. "The work you do for the church auxiliary alone would exhaust most women, and managing a household and a difficult teenager on top of it, I don't know how you manage." "Clara's not difficult," Evelyn said warmly. "She's just sensitive. Her mother's troubles affected her deeply, poor thing. I do my best to provide structure and guidance, but some wounds take time to heal. Still, taking on another woman's child, especially one so troubled, that's true Christian charity." Clara's hands tightened on the rag. She forced them to relax, to keep scrubbing in steady circles. Just words. Just the performance Evelyn put on for the world. It didn't matter what they believed, except it did matter, because their belief was what kept Clara trapped. As long as everyone saw Evelyn as the selfless stepmother struggling with an ungrateful child, no one would question the locked doors or the missed meals or the way Clara flinched from sudden movements. She finished cleaning around midnight. The Hendersons had finally left. Evelyn had retired to her room without another word. The house settled into its nighttime quiet, the kind that felt heavy and watchful, like something holding its breath. Clara climbed the stairs to her actual room on the second floor. It was small but well furnished, decorated in shades of cream and rose that Evelyn had chosen. Pretty. Appropriate for a young lady of good family. The bars on the window were painted white to match the trim, almost decorative if you didn't look too closely. She changed into her nightgown and lay down, staring at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come for hours. It never did on nights like this. Her mind would replay every moment of the evening, cataloging her mistakes, calculating how to avoid them next time. The mental arithmetic of survival. But tonight was different. Tonight her thoughts kept returning to the window, to the stranger's face, to that moment of being truly seen. Who was he? A drifter passing through town? A ranch hand from one of the outlying properties? She'd never seen him before, and in a town this small, that meant something. And why had he looked at her that way? Not with pity or disgust, or the careful neutrality most people used when confronted with something uncomfortable. He'd looked at her like someone reading a difficult passage in a book, focused, intent on understanding. Clara rolled onto her side, pulling the quilt up to her chin. The mark on her cheek had faded to a dull ache. By tomorrow it would barely show. Evelyn was careful about that too. Nothing that would raise questions. Nothing that would last. Outside her window, an owl called in the distance. The sound was lonely and wild, a reminder that beyond this house and this town, a whole world existed. A world Clara had almost forgotten about. She must have finally slept because the next thing she knew, pale sunlight was streaming through the curtains. Her first thought was relief. She'd survived the night. Her second was dread. Another day to get through. Another day of walking on eggshells and waiting for the next mistake. She dressed carefully in a plain gray dress with a high collar and long sleeves, braided her dark hair into a neat plait, pinched her cheeks to bring some color to her face because Evelyn hated when she looked sickly. Downstairs, breakfast was already laid out. Evelyn sat at the table reading correspondence, a cup of tea steaming at her elbow. She looked up when Clara entered. "Good morning?" Her voice was pleasant, as if nothing had happened. "There's oatmeal on the stove. The Reverend's wife will be by at 10 to discuss the charity auction. Make sure the parlor is presentable." "Yes, ma'am." Clara served herself a small portion and sat at the far end of the table. They ate in silence. This was the pattern after punishments, a return to careful normalcy, as if the cellar and the slap existed in some parallel reality that only emerged in private. "I'll need you to run some errands this afternoon," Evelyn continued, setting down her teacup. "The dressmaker has my order ready, and we need more lamp oil from Henderson's. You can take the trap if you're quick about it." Clara nodded. Errands meant time out of the house, time to breathe. "And Clara?" Evelyn's voice sharpened just slightly. "Do try to be cordial if you encounter anyone. I won't have people thinking I'm raising a sullen little mouse." "Yes, ma'am." After breakfast, Clara spent an hour cleaning the parlor until it gleamed. She beat the cushions, dusted the mantelpiece, arranged the flowers in their vase with obsessive precision. Everything had to be perfect. Everything had to demonstrate that Evelyn ran a proper household. The Reverend's wife arrived promptly at 10. Clara served tea and small cakes, then retreated upstairs while the women discussed fundraising strategies and gossip disguised as concern for various parishioners. Through the floor she could hear Evelyn's laugh, bright and generous, the laugh of a woman without a care in the world. At 2 o'clock, Clara hitched the small trap and set out for town. The afternoon was warm, the sky a brilliant blue interrupted only by a few lazy clouds. The road into town wound through fields still green from recent rain, past the Miller farm where children played in the yard, past the old cemetery where her mother's name wasn't among the graves because they'd never found a body. Town was small, a main street lined with shops and businesses, a few side streets of houses, a church with a white steeple. Everyone knew everyone. Everyone had opinions about everyone else's business. Clara tied up the horse outside the dressmaker's shop and went inside. Mrs. Chen looked up from her sewing and smiled. "Afternoon, Clara. Your stepmother's dress is ready. Let me fetch it." While she waited, Clara examined the fabrics on display. Rich velvets and delicate laces, materials that cost more than most families earned in a month. Evelyn ordered a new dress every season. "Appearances matter," she always said. "People respect success." "Here we are." Mrs. Chen returned with a package wrapped in brown paper. It came out beautifully. The emerald silk was perfect for her coloring. Clara paid from the coins Evelyn had given her and headed to Henderson's general store. The bell above the door chimed as she entered. Mr. Henderson was helping another customer, so Clara wandered the aisles, gathering the items on Evelyn's list. Lamp oil, writing paper, a particular brand of tea that had to be special ordered. She was reaching for the tea when a voice spoke behind her. "Careful with that one. The tin's dented on the side." She turned. It was him, the stranger from the window. Up close, he was older than she'd first thought. Maybe 30, with the kind of weathered face that came from years outdoors. He wore work clothes, dusty from the road, and stood with the easy stillness of someone comfortable with silence. Clara's hand froze on the tea tin. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "You saw," she finally said. Not a question. "I saw. Are you going to tell someone?" Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile. "Who would I tell? Who would believe me?" The truth of it hit like a fist. He was right. A drifter's word against Evelyn Hale's sterling reputation, they'd run him out of town for making such accusations. Might even jail him for slander. "Why were you there?" Clara asked. "At the window." "Looking for work. Thought the house might need a ranch hand. Heard voices, saw the light." He paused. "Saw you?" Mr. Henderson called from the front. "You finding everything all right, Clara?" She pulled her attention away from the stranger. "Yes, sir. Just finishing up." When she turned back, the man was examining a coil of rope with apparent interest, giving her space. She gathered the rest of her items and brought them to the counter. "Who's your friend?" Mr. Henderson asked as he tallied her purchases. "I don't know." "Jonas Creed," the stranger said, appearing at her elbow. "Just passing through. Heard you might need help at the feed store." Henderson's expression cleared. "Oh, you'll want to talk to Stevens about that. His place is 2 streets over. Can't miss it." Obliged. Clara paid and gathered her packages. When she stepped outside, Jonas followed at a polite distance. She loaded the packages into the trap, aware of him watching. "I'm not who you think I am," she said without looking at him. "I don't think you're anything. I just saw what I saw. Everyone in this town will tell you I'm difficult, that I'm troubled, that my stepmother is a saint for putting up with me. And what would you tell me?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that in 6 years. No one cared what she would say. It doesn't matter what I tell you. You'd leave town in a week anyway. Everyone does. She climbed into the trap. Jonas stepped back, making no move to stop her. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I don't think you're difficult. I think you're a girl who's learned to survive the only way she could, and I think that takes more strength than most people have. Clara's throat tightened. She picked up the reins, desperate to leave before the tears came. There's no work at the feed store, she managed. Stevens does his own hauling. I know. She looked at him then. Really looked. Then why? Because I wanted to make sure you knew someone saw. That it wasn't nothing. That you're not. He stopped, seemed to reconsider his words. That you're not as alone as you think. The tears came anyway. Clara turned away, blinking hard. You should leave town, Mr. Creed. There's nothing here worth staying for. She snapped the reins and drove away, leaving him standing in the dusty street. She didn't look back. The ride home blurred past. She couldn't stop shaking, couldn't stop hearing his words. Someone saw. You're not alone. But she was alone. That was the whole point. Isolation was what made Evelyn's control possible. The carefully constructed story, the public performance, the private cruelty no one would believe because no one wanted to believe it. One witness didn't change that. One stranger passing through didn't alter the fundamental architecture of her prison. Clara returned home and delivered the packages to Evelyn, who inspected each item with the thoroughness of a military quartermaster. Finding nothing to criticize, she dismissed Clara with a wave. Dinner that evening was quiet. Evelyn spoke about the charity auction, about Mrs. Henderson's garish taste in jewelry, about the new family moving into the Collins property. Clara listened and murmured agreement at appropriate moments, her mind elsewhere. She kept thinking about the look on Jonas Creed's face when he'd watched her through that window, the way he'd seen her suffering and named it for what it was, not sensitivity or difficulty or the lingering effects of childhood trauma, just cruelty. Simple, deliberate cruelty. It should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt dangerous, because now she couldn't unhear his words, couldn't unsee the reflection of herself in someone else's eyes. For 6 years, she'd survived by making herself small, by accepting Evelyn's version of reality because fighting it was impossible, by disappearing into the role of the troubled stepdaughter who needed firm guidance. But Jonas Creed had looked at her and seen someone else entirely, someone who'd learned to survive, someone strong. And Clara didn't know what to do with that, didn't know how to hold that image of herself alongside the one she'd built so carefully, the one that kept her safe. That night, lying in bed, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Evelyn's footsteps, slow and measured. They stopped outside Clara's door. Clara held her breath. Waited. The doorknob didn't turn. After a long moment, the footsteps retreated. She exhaled slowly, her heart hammering. Close, too close. Evelyn's punishments were often preceded by these midnight visits, standing outside the door, letting Clara's fear build, before deciding whether tonight would be a night of consequence or mercy. Apparently, it was mercy. This time, Clara pulled the quilt tighter around herself and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow would come, and the day after that, and the day after that. An endless succession of days to survive, to endure. Unless... The thought was so small and so dangerous that she almost smothered it immediately. But it persisted, whispering in the darkness. Unless something changed, she'd spent 6 years believing change was impossible. That her only choice was to endure until she turned 18 and could legally leave. Another 2 years, 730 days. She'd survived them the same way she'd survived the last 2,000, by being perfect, by being invisible, by becoming exactly what Evelyn needed her to be. But now a stranger had looked at her and seen the truth, had named it aloud, had made it real in a way it hadn't been real before. And Clara couldn't stop wondering, what if one witness was enough to start unraveling everything? What if the careful lies Evelyn had built could be torn apart by a single person who refused to believe them? What if? The question terrified her, but it also woke something she'd thought had died years ago, a tiny, stubborn spark of hope that whispered, maybe, just maybe. Jonas Creed didn't leave town. Clara saw him 3 days later, working on the fence line at the Patterson Ranch just north of town. She was riding back from delivering a message to Mrs. Patterson, another of Evelyn's errands designed to keep her busy and visible. proof of the stepmother's efforts to integrate her troubled charge into community life. He had his back to the road, shirt sleeves rolled up, driving posts into the hard ground with steady, methodical strikes. The sound of the hammer carried across the field. Clara slowed the horse without meaning to, watching the rhythm of his work. He didn't look up. She rode on, her heart beating irregularly. He'd found work. He was staying. The thought sat in her chest like something with weight. At dinner that evening, Evelyn was in a foul mood. The charity auction had been postponed due to a conflict with the Harvest Festival, and Mrs. Henderson had suggested combining the two events, a suggestion Evelyn clearly considered beneath the dignity of her carefully planned fundraiser. "The woman has no sense of propriety," she said, cutting her chicken with sharp, precise movements. "A harvest festival is for farmers and field hands. My auction was meant to attract a better class of donor." Clara kept her eyes on her plate. "I'm sure they meant well. I'm sure they meant to save themselves the trouble of attending two events." Evelyn's knife scraped against the china. "And you, did you deliver my message to Caroline Patterson?" "Yes, ma'am." "And?" "She said she'd be happy to host the ladies' tea next month." "Did she seem enthusiastic, or was she simply being polite?" Clara hesitated, trying to remember Mrs. Patterson's exact expression and tone. This was the trap. Evelyn wanted details, wanted to parse every interaction for hidden meanings and social calculations. The wrong answer would prove Clara wasn't paying attention, wasn't taking her responsibilities seriously. "She seemed pleased," Clara said carefully. "She mentioned she'd been hoping to use her new tea service." Evelyn's expression softened slightly. "Good. The Pattersons have been invaluable to my work. I won't have anyone thinking I take their support for granted." They finished the meal in silence. Clara cleared the dishes, washed them, dried them, put them away in their designated places. Every movement precise. Every task completed exactly as expected. Later, alone in her room, she stood at the barred window and looked out at the darkness. Somewhere out there, Jonas Creed was settling into a bunkhouse at the Patterson Ranch. Somewhere out there was someone who knew the truth about her life and hadn't run from it. The thought kept her awake long after the house fell silent. The following Sunday, the whole town gathered for services at the white-steepled church on Main Street. Clara sat beside Evelyn in the third pew, close enough to the front to demonstrate piety, far enough back to show humility. Evelyn's favorite position. The Reverend droned on about forgiveness and grace. Clara let the words wash over her, meaningless and familiar. She'd learned years ago not to pray for rescue. Either no one was listening, or they'd decided she deserved exactly what she got. After the service, the congregation spilled onto the lawn for socializing. Evelyn immediately found Mrs. Henderson and launched into a detailed discussion of the auction postponement. Clara stood slightly behind her stepmother's left shoulder, the position of a dutiful daughter, nodding when appropriate. "Clara, dear, you look pale," Mrs. Henderson said suddenly. "Are you feeling well?" "She's fine," Evelyn answered before Clara could speak. "Just tired from her studies. I've been encouraging her to apply herself more seriously to her education. A young woman needs accomplishments." Of course, though you mustn't work the poor girl too hard." Evelyn's hand found Clara's shoulder, squeezed just hard enough to ache. To anyone watching, it looked affectionate. "I only want what's best for her." Clara caught movement at the edge of her vision. Jonas Creed stood near the church steps, clearly uncomfortable in clothes too clean for ranch work. "Mr. Patterson was introducing him to the Reverend, explaining something about fence repairs and seasonal labor. Their eyes met across the lawn. Jonas gave no sign of recognition, just looked at her with that same steady assessment he'd used in Henderson's store. Clara looked away first, heat rising in her cheeks. "Who's that?" Mrs. Henderson asked, following Clara's gaze. "New hand at our place," Mr. Patterson said, joining their circle. "Jonas Creed, good worker, quiet, but knows his way around a fence line." "Where's he from?" Evelyn asked, her tone casual, but her attention sharp. "Didn't say. I don't ask too many questions when a man shows up willing to work for fair wages." Patterson chuckled. "Hard to find good help these days." Evelyn's grip on Clara's shoulder tightened fractionally. "I suppose everyone deserves a fresh start." The conversation moved on. Clara's shoulder throbbed where Evelyn's fingers dug in. She kept her expression neutral, her breathing steady. Just another Sunday. Just another performance. But when they returned home and Evelyn dismissed her, Clara went straight to her room and stood at the window, looking north toward the Patterson ranch. The bars cast shadows across her hands where she gripped them. He was still here, still close enough to see, and Evelyn had noticed her noticing. That night, the cellar door stayed unlocked, but Clara knew better than to feel relieved. Sometimes Evelyn's punishments came in waiting, in the anticipation of consequences that might arrive tonight or tomorrow or next week. The uncertainty was its own form of control. 3 days passed. Clara moved through them like walking on ice, every step careful, every word measured. Evelyn watched her with an attention that felt like being studied under glass, looking for something, some sign of disobedience or deception. On Wednesday afternoon, Clara was hanging laundry in the yard when a rider approached. She recognized Mr. Patterson's youngest son, Tommy, astride the family's old mare. "Message for Mrs. Hale," he called, dismounting. Clara wiped her hands on her apron. "I'll take it to her." "Actually, Pa said I should deliver it direct. Where is she?" "In the parlor, I think." Tommy headed for the front door, leaving his horse ground-tied. Clara returned to the laundry, lifting another wet sheet from the basket. The physical work was soothing in its simplicity. Pin the corners, smooth out the wrinkles, make sure it hangs straight. She'd nearly finished when Evelyn's voice cut through the afternoon quiet. "Clara, come inside. Now." The tone made her stomach clench. She dropped the sheet back in the basket and hurried toward the house. Tommy was already riding away, his errand completed. Evelyn stood in the parlor, a note in her hand. Her face was perfectly composed, but Clara had learned to read the tiny signs, the set of her jaw, the way she held herself very still. "It seems," Evelyn said, her voice dangerously soft, "that Mr. Patterson is hosting a barn dance on Saturday. His wife specifically requested that we attend, both of us." Clara waited. There had to be more. "Apparently Caroline wants to introduce you to their nephew, a young man of excellent prospects, visiting from back east." Evelyn's eyes were cold. "She thinks you'd make a suitable match." The thought was absurd. Clara was 16, not yet finished with her education, but she understood what was really happening. Mrs. Patterson, in her kind but misguided way, was trying to help, trying to give the poor troubled girl some normal social interaction. It was the worst thing she could have done. "I don't have to go," Clara said quickly. "I can say I'm unwell." "You'll go." Evelyn set the note down with careful precision. "We'll both go. And you will be charming and gracious and show the Pattersons exactly how well I've raised you. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." "I will not have anyone, thinking I've failed in my duties to you. I've given you everything, a home, an education, a position in society, and you will demonstrate appropriate gratitude." Clara's hands were shaking. She clasped them behind her back. "I understand." "Do you?" "Because lately, Clara, I've noticed something different about you. A certain distraction, as if your mind is elsewhere when you should be focused on your responsibilities." "I'm sorry. I'll do better." Evelyn crossed the space between them in 3 steps. Her hand caught Clara's chin, forcing her head up. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you." Clara met her stepmother's eyes, saw the calculation there, the cold assessment of how much punishment would be appropriate to correct this latest infraction. "You are nothing without me," Evelyn said quietly. "Your father entrusted me with your care, and I have devoted myself to that task despite your best efforts to humiliate me. The least you can do is show some appreciation. I am grateful." "Then prove it. Saturday night you will smile, you will dance, you will make polite conversation, and you will remind everyone in this town why I am considered a saint for taking you in." She released Clara's chin with a small push. "Now finish the laundry, and don't come in for dinner until you've thought seriously about your attitude." Clara fled to the yard. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely pin the sheets. She worked mechanically, fighting the tears that wanted to come. Crying solved nothing. Crying just made her face blotchy and her eyes red, which gave Evelyn more ammunition. She finished the laundry as the sun began to set. Her back ached from bending. Her fingers were raw from the pins. She went inside expecting to find the dining room empty, dinner cleared away as punishment for her tardiness. Instead, Evelyn sat at the table, a plate set out for Clara. "Sit down. The food's getting cold." Clara sat. The plate held a single piece of chicken and a small serving of vegetables. Not quite enough to satisfy, but more than she'd expected. They ate in silence. When Clara finished, Evelyn spoke without looking up. "I've decided you'll wear the blue dress on Saturday, the one with the lace collar. It makes you look less sallow." "Thank you. And you'll do something about your hair? That braid makes you look like a child." "Yes, ma'am." Evelyn dabbed her mouth with her napkin. "This nephew of the Pattersons, his name is William something. He's studying law. Very respectable family. If he shows interest, you'll encourage it." Clara's throat tightened. "I'm only 16. Old enough to think about your future. Old enough to recognize an opportunity when it's handed to you." Evelyn's gaze was sharp. "Unless you'd prefer to remain dependent on my charity indefinitely?" The trap was obvious. Either accept the possibility of courtship with a stranger, or admit she wanted to stay in this house, under Evelyn's control. No good answer. "I'll be gracious to Mr. Patterson's nephew," Clara said. "Excellent. Now clear the dishes and go to bed. You look exhausted." Clara lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. A barn dance, public, social, full of people. The thought terrified her, not because of dancing or small talk, but because it meant hours of performing under Evelyn's watchful eye. Hours of being the grateful stepdaughter, the troubled girl making progress. And Jonas Creed would probably be there. Ranch hands always attended these events. He'd see her smiling and laughing and playing her role perfectly. He'd see exactly how good she'd gotten at disappearing into the lie. The thought made her feel sick. Saturday arrived too quickly. Clara spent the morning helping Evelyn prepare. Pressing clothes, arranging her stepmother's hair, making sure every detail was perfect. Evelyn was in high spirits, chattering about who would attend and what she'd wear, and how important it was to maintain good relations with the Patterson family. "They're simple people," she said while Clara laced her corset, "but influential in their way. Caroline's brother is a state senator. These connections matter, Clara. You'd do well to remember that." In the afternoon, Clara bathed and dressed in the blue gown. It was pretty enough, modest and well-made, but it hung on her frame like it belonged to someone else. She'd lost weight over the past year, skipped too many meals, either as punishment or because her stomach was too knotted with anxiety to eat. Evelyn surveyed her critically. "You're too thin. It makes you look consumptive." "I'm sorry." "Pin your hair up, and for heaven's sake, smile. You're going to a dance, not a funeral." They rode to the Patterson ranch in the small carriage, arriving just as the sun began to set. Lanterns were strung across the barn, casting warm pools of light. Music drifted from inside, a fiddle and guitar playing something lively and fast. People were already gathered, farmers and their wives, ranch hands cleaned up and nervous, children running wild between the adults. The air smelled of hay and wood smoke and the special sweetness of a community gathering. Mrs. Patterson greeted them warmly, pulling Evelyn into conversation almost immediately. Clara stood awkwardly at the edge of the group, trying to look pleasant and approachable. "You must be Clara." She turned. A young man stood beside her, tall and well-dressed, with the kind of smooth confidence that came from never doubting your place in the world. This had to be the nephew. "Yes, you're William?" "Will, please. William makes me sound like my grandfather." He smiled. It was a nice smile, practiced and charming. "My aunt speaks highly of you." "That's kind of her." "She mentioned you're interested in literature? I'm something of a reader myself. Have you come across any Dickens?" The conversation was easy, painless. Will was educated and polite and clearly trying to make a good impression. Under different circumstances, Clara might have enjoyed talking to him, but she could feel Evelyn watching from across the barn, could feel the weight of expectation pressing down. Be charming. Be gracious. Make this work. "I've read some," Claire said. "Great Expectations is my favorite." "Ah, excellent choice. The themes of social mobility and self-improvement, quite relevant, I think, to modern life." They talked about books for several minutes. Will was knowledgeable without being condescending, asked her opinions, and actually listened to the answers. He was exactly the kind of young man any sensible girl would be pleased to meet. Clara felt nothing. When the music changed to something slower, Will offered his hand. Would you care to dance? She glanced at Evelyn, who nodded almost imperceptibly. I'd be delighted. Will was a competent dancer, leading her through the steps with easy confidence. Other couples swirled around them. Clara focused on not tripping, on keeping the appropriate distance, on smiling at the right moments. You're very quiet, Will observed. Is everything all right? Just a bit overwhelmed. I don't attend many social events. My aunt mentioned you've had a difficult time, losing your mother so young. His expression was sympathetic. That must have been terribly hard. Clara's smile felt like it might crack. My stepmother has been very supportive. She seems like a remarkable woman. The work she does for the community, it's quite admirable. They continued dancing. Will continued talking. Clara continued smiling and nodding and saying the things she was supposed to say. When the song ended, Will escorted her back to the side of the barn. I've enjoyed our conversation very much. Perhaps we could write to each other. I'll be here visiting for another month. That would be lovely. Evelyn appeared at her elbow. William, how wonderful to see you enjoying yourself. Clara, dear, why don't you get us some refreshments? I'd love to speak with Will about his studies. Clara escaped gratefully, weaving through the crowd toward the long tables laden with food and drinks. She was pouring lemonade when a voice spoke quietly beside her. You're good at it. She didn't need to look to know it was Jonas. Good at what? Playing the part they want you to play. Her hand trembled, sloshing lemonade onto the table. She set down the pitcher carefully. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. Clara finally looked at him. He stood slightly apart from the crowd, still wearing work clothes despite the festive atmosphere. His expression was unreadable. You should leave me alone, she said quietly. People will talk. Let them talk. You don't understand. If Evelyn thinks... She stopped herself. Too dangerous, too much. Thinks what? That someone might actually see through her performance? Jonas's voice was low but steady. I've been watching her all week. The way she touches your shoulder in public. The way people praise her for her patience. She's built something impressive. Clara's throat tightened. Stop. A whole town convinced that you're the problem, that she's the solution. That's not easy to pull off. Requires real skill. I need to get back. Clara picked up the glasses of lemonade, hands shaking. I'm not going to tell anyone, Jonas said. That's not why I'm saying this. Then why are you? Because I think you need to hear that someone knows. That someone sees what's really happening, not the story she tells. The truth. Tears burned behind Clara's eyes. She blinked them back furiously. The truth doesn't matter. She's won. She won years ago. And I'm just trying to survive until I can leave. And then what? You think you can walk away and forget 6 years of this? The question hit like a slap. Clara stared at him, the lemonade glasses trembling in her hands. What else am I supposed to do? Jonas was quiet for a moment. I don't know yet, but I know running away while pretending it never happened. That's not surviving. That's just a different kind of dying. Mrs. Patterson's voice cut through the moment. Clara, dear, Evelyn's looking for you. Clara fled without another word, carrying the lemonade back to where Evelyn stood with Will and several other prominent families. She handed over the drinks, murmured apologies for taking so long, slipped back into her role. But Jonas's words followed her. Different kind of dying. As if her plan, endure 2 more years, leave at 18, start over somewhere new, was somehow inadequate. Cowardly, even. What did he expect her to do? Fight back? Against what? Against a woman who controlled every aspect of her life, who had the support and sympathy of the entire community. It was impossible. Worse than impossible, it was delusional. The evening dragged on. Clara danced with Will twice more, made polite conversation with Mrs. Henderson about needlework, complimented Mrs. Patterson on the decorations, performed her role flawlessly. And all the while she felt Jonas watching from the edges of the barn, not staring, just aware, present in a way that made her constantly conscious of the space he occupied. On the ride home, Evelyn was pleased. You did well tonight. William seems quite taken with you. His aunt mentioned he'll be calling this week. Clara looked out at the darkness. He's very nice. Nice, Evelyn laughed softly. Is that all? Clara, the boy is from an excellent family. He's educated, well-mannered, and clearly interested. You could do far worse. I'm only 16. Old enough for courtship. Old enough to start thinking seriously about your future? Evelyn's voice took on a sharper edge. Or would you prefer to remain dependent on me indefinitely? Living in my house, eating my food, wearing clothes I provide? No, ma'am. Then perhaps you should encourage William's interest. A girl in your position can't afford to be particular. My position. The words settled like stones. Clara understood what Evelyn meant. A girl without a mother, with a father always absent, with a reputation for being difficult and unstable. Damaged goods. Lucky to receive any attention at all. I'll write to him, Clara said quietly. Good. And Clara? Evelyn's hand found her knee, squeezed hard enough to bruise. I noticed you speaking with that ranch hand, Jonas something. Clara's heart lurched. Mr. Patterson introduced him around. I was just being polite. The sound was neutral but weighted with meaning. I'm sure you were. But darling, you must be careful about appearances. A young lady doesn't want people thinking she's indiscriminate in her associations. The threat was clear. Be seen talking to Jonas again, and there would be consequences. They arrived home. Clara helped Evelyn out of her dress, hung it carefully, brushed out her hair. The nightly routine, performed in silence. When she was finally dismissed to her own room, Clara's hands were shaking. She couldn't see Jonas again, couldn't risk even looking at him. Evelyn had noticed, and that meant she'd be watching. Any further contact would be read as defiance, as rebellion. And the punishment for rebellion was always severe. Clara lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. 2 more years, 730 days. She could survive that. She'd survived this long. But Jonas's words haunted her. A different kind of dying. Was that what she'd been doing? Not surviving, but slowly suffocating? Becoming less and less herself until there was nothing left but the performance? She didn't know. Didn't know what the alternative looked like. Didn't know if there even was an alternative. Outside her window, an owl called. The same lonely sound as always. Clara closed her eyes and tried not to think about strangers who saw too much, or the weight of 2 more years stretching ahead like a prison sentence. Tried not to think at all. But sleep, when it came, brought dreams of cellars and locked doors and voices calling her name that she couldn't quite reach. She woke before dawn, sweating and disoriented, her heart pounding. Sunlight crept through the curtains. Sunday. Church again. Another performance. Clara rose and dressed mechanically, braiding her hair, pinching color into her cheeks. Downstairs, Evelyn was already at breakfast, reading correspondence. Good morning, Clara said. Evelyn looked up, studied her face. You look tired. I didn't sleep well. Excitement from the dance, I imagine. Evelyn returned to her letters. Will's aunt has already written. He plans to call on Tuesday afternoon. You'll wear the green dress, and for heaven's sake, try to look more lively. The boy doesn't want a ghost for a companion. Yes, ma'am. Church was the same as always, Evelyn in her pew, Clara at her side. The Reverend's sermon about kindness and charity. The socializing afterward, where everyone praised Evelyn's work and spoke to Clara in those careful, pitying tones reserved for the damaged. Will found her on the lawn, smiling his practiced smile. I'm looking forward to Tuesday. As am I, Clara lied. She caught a glimpse of Jonas near the church steps, talking quietly with Mr. Patterson. He didn't look her way, didn't acknowledge her existence. It should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like abandonment, which was absurd. He was nothing to her, a stranger who'd witnessed one moment of her life and drawn conclusions that meant nothing. He didn't know her, didn't know what she'd endured or how she'd learned to survive it. He didn't know anything. But when she climbed into the carriage beside Evelyn for the ride home, Clara couldn't stop herself from looking back. Jonas stood in the churchyard, his face turned toward her. Their eyes met for just a second. Then Evelyn snapped the reins and they were moving, and the moment was gone. That night, Clara's door stayed unlocked. No midnight visits, no punishments. Just the terrible waiting, the uncertainty that was somehow worse than knowing. Monday passed in routine tasks. Tuesday morning, Evelyn inspected Clara like a general reviewing troops before battle. Hair perfect, dress pressed, posture correct, every detail examined and corrected. Will arrived precisely at 2 o'clock. They sat in the parlor while Evelyn played chaperone from across the room, needlework in her lap, ears tuned to every word. Will talked about his studies, about the law firm he'd join after graduation, about his family's expectations. Clara nodded and smiled and asked appropriate questions. It was exactly like the barn dance, easy, painless, completely hollow. When he left, he took her hand. "I've enjoyed this very much. May I call again?" "Please do." Evelyn waited until his carriage disappeared down the road before speaking. "That went well. He's clearly serious about you." Clara said nothing. "You don't seem pleased." Evelyn set down her needlework. Most girls would be thrilled to receive such attention. "I'm pleased. He's very nice." There's that word again, nice. Evelyn crossed the room, stood too close. "What's wrong with you? Why can't you ever just be grateful for the opportunities I provide?" "I am grateful." "Then show it. Will is coming to dinner on Friday. You will be charming and engaged, and you will make him believe that you're worth the trouble of courting." Evelyn's voice dropped to that dangerous quiet. "Because if you embarrass me, Clara, if you ruin this chance with your sullen moods and your ingratitude, there will be consequences. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Now go to your room. I can't stand to look at you right now." Clara climbed the stairs slowly. In her room, she sat on the bed and stared at her hands. They were shaking again, always shaking lately. What would happen if she did embarrass Evelyn? If she told Will the truth? If she stood up in church and announced what really happened in this house? They wouldn't believe her. That was what would happen. They'd think she was hysterical, unstable, attention-seeking. Everything Evelyn had been saying about her for 6 years. And then the real punishment would come. Not the cellar, not the slaps, something worse. Something that would break whatever pieces of herself Clara still managed to protect. She couldn't risk it, couldn't fight, could only endure. A different kind of dying. Clara lay back on the bed and closed her eyes. Outside, the afternoon sun painted shadows across the walls. In the distance, a dog barked. Normal sounds. A normal day. Except nothing was normal. Nothing had been normal in 6 years. And Clara was starting to suspect that nothing ever would be again. Not unless something changed. Not unless someone forced the change. But who? And how? And at what cost? The questions circled endlessly, finding no answers. Just the same trapped feeling, the same suffocating awareness that time was passing and nothing was getting better. Only worse. Slowly, steadily worse. Like drowning in inches instead of feet. Still drowning. Just taking longer to finish. Friday arrived with rain. Cold. Driving sheets that turned the roads to mud and made the house feel smaller, darker. Clara stood at the kitchen window watching water stream down the glass while Evelyn reviewed the dinner menu for the 3rd time. The roast must be perfect, not overdone. Will's family is accustomed to quality. Evelyn tapped her finger against the written menu. "And you'll wear your hair down. Men prefer it that way." Clara's stomach turned. She hadn't worn her hair down in years. It felt too exposed, too vulnerable. But arguing would only make things worse. "Yes, ma'am." The afternoon crept by in preparation. Clara helped the cook with vegetables, set the table with Evelyn's best china, arranged flowers in a crystal vase. Every detail scrutinized and corrected until it met Evelyn's exacting standards. By the time Will's carriage arrived at 6, Clara felt scraped raw. She'd changed into the green dress, left her hair loose as instructed, pinched her cheeks until they burned. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the girl staring back. She looked older, tired, like someone playing dress-up in a life that didn't fit. Will greeted them with his usual polished charm, complimenting the house, the flowers, Evelyn's dress. Everything perfect, everything rehearsed. Dinner conversation flowed easily at first. Will discussed his studies, his plans to join his father's firm, the cases that interested him most. Evelyn prompted Clara with subtle cues, nod here, smile there, ask this question. "And what about you, Clara?" Will asked over the main course. "What are your aspirations, beyond marriage, I mean? Do you have interests you'd like to pursue?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that in years. She glanced at Evelyn, whose expression remained pleasantly neutral. "I enjoy reading, writing sometimes." "What do you write about?" "Nothing. Everything." The thoughts she couldn't speak aloud. The feelings she had nowhere else to put, but she couldn't say that. Just observations, small things. "You should show me sometime. I'd be interested to read your work." "Oh, I don't think..." Clara's writing is quite personal, Evelyn interrupted smoothly. More of a private journal than anything meant for sharing. But it's wonderful that she has a creative outlet, don't you think? So important for a young woman's development. Will nodded agreeably. The conversation shifted to safer topics. Clara's hands trembled as she cut her meat. She felt like a puppet, strings pulled by Evelyn's invisible hands, performing for an audience of one. After dinner, they moved to the parlor. Rain hammered against the windows. Evelyn excused herself to supervise the cook's cleanup, leaving them alone for the first time. Will sat beside Clara on the settee, closer than strictly proper. I hope you don't mind my saying this, but you seem troubled tonight. Is something wrong? Just tired? You're always tired when I see you, always quiet. He studied her face with unexpected intensity. Are you happy here, Clara? The question was so direct it took her breath away. For a wild moment, she considered telling him everything. The cellar, the punishments, the 6 years of careful cruelty hidden behind Evelyn's perfect performance. But then she heard footsteps in the hall. Evelyn, returning, and the moment passed. I'm very fortunate, Clara said, the words ashes in her mouth. My stepmother has been incredibly generous. Will looked like he wanted to say more, but Evelyn swept back into the room, all smiles and gracious hospitality. The rest of the evening passed in polite small talk until Will finally took his leave around 9. I'll call again next week, he said, taking Clara's hand. His grip was gentle, but his eyes were searching, like he was trying to read something written in a language he didn't quite understand. I look forward to it. After his carriage disappeared into the rain, Evelyn closed the door and turned to Clara. For a moment, she said nothing. Just looked at her with an expression Clara couldn't quite read. You were adequate tonight. Not brilliant, but adequate. Evelyn walked to the parlor, began snuffing out candles. Though I noticed you barely touched your food. Are you trying to make yourself ill? I wasn't hungry. You're never hungry anymore. You're wasting away. Evelyn's voice was almost conversational. People will think I'm starving you. Clara's throat tightened. I'll try to eat more. See that you do. I won't have anyone questioning how I care for you. Evelyn extinguished the last candle. Go to bed. You look dreadful. Clara climbed the stairs, her legs heavy. In her room, she didn't bother lighting a lamp, just sat on the bed in the darkness, listening to rain beat against the roof. Will had asked if she was happy. The question kept circling back, demanding an answer she couldn't give. Happy. The word felt foreign, like something from another language, another life. She couldn't even remember what happiness felt like anymore. Just the absence of immediate pain. Just the temporary relief of a punishment avoided. That wasn't happiness. That was just survival. And Jonas had been right. It was its own kind of dying. Clara lay back and closed her eyes. Tomorrow she'd wake up and do it all again. Smile and nod and perform. Shrink herself down into something manageable. Something that didn't threaten Evelyn's carefully constructed world. 2 more years. That was all. Just 2 more years. But the number felt impossible now. Insurmountable. Like trying to count individual raindrops in a storm. She must have slept, because when she opened her eyes again, gray dawn light filtered through the curtains. Sunday. Church. Another performance. Clara rose and dressed mechanically. Downstairs, Evelyn was already in her Sunday best, reading scripture at the breakfast table. She looked up when Clara entered. We're leaving early today. I promised Reverend Miller I'd help arrange flowers before the service. Yes, ma'am. They ate in silence. Clara forced down oatmeal that tasted like paste, knowing Evelyn would notice if she didn't. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving everything dripping and gray. The church was nearly empty when they arrived. Evelyn immediately busied herself with flower arrangements while Clara waited in the pew, hands folded, mind blank. People began trickling in around 10. The usual families, the usual faces, Mrs. Henderson with her excessive jewelry, the Pattersons with their brood of children. Will arrived with his aunt and uncle, catching Clara's eye with a small wave. Jonas was the last to enter, water still beading on his coat. He took a seat in the back row, apart from everyone else. The service began. Clara stood and sat and knelt when appropriate, mouthed the words to hymns without hearing them. Her mind felt disconnected from her body, floating somewhere above the scene. It wasn't until the Reverend asked them to bow their heads for prayer that something broke. Clara closed her eyes and felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Silent, unstoppable. She couldn't have said why they came. Just that suddenly she was crying, shoulders shaking, hands pressed to her face. Evelyn's fingers dug into her arm. "Stop it," she hissed under her breath. "People are looking." But Clara couldn't stop. 6 years of swallowed screams were forcing their way out in tears she couldn't control. She stood abruptly, pushing past Evelyn, stumbling into the aisle. The entire congregation watched as she fled. She heard Evelyn's voice, smooth and concerned. "Please excuse us. She's been unwell." Clara burst through the church doors into cold morning air. She kept walking, not caring where, just needing distance. Her shoes squelched in mud, her dress dragged heavy and wet. Behind her, footsteps. "Clara, stop!" Not Evelyn. Jonas. She kept walking. "Clara!" He caught up, matched her pace. "Where are you going?" "Away." To where? She had no answer. There was nowhere to go, nowhere safe. She stopped walking, stood in the middle of the muddy road, rain-soaked and shaking. "I can't do this anymore," she said. The words came out broken. I can't." Jonas said nothing, just stood there, solid and present, while she fell apart. "She's going to be so angry," Clara whispered. "You don't understand. When we get home, she'll—" The words choked off. "Then don't go home," Clara laughed, a sound without humor. "And go where? I'm 16. I have no money, no family, nowhere to run. The whole town thinks I'm unstable. They'll drag me back within an hour. Not if someone speaks up, not if someone tells the truth. No one will believe it. You saw her in there. She's already explaining this away." Poor troubled Clara, so sensitive, such a burden. The tears came harder. "It doesn't matter what the truth is. She's one. She's only one if you accept that." Jonas's voice was quiet but firm. "If you give up." "I gave up 6 years ago. I've just been going through the motions since." Behind them, the church doors opened. Evelyn appeared, her face a mask of concern for anyone watching. But her eyes, when they found Clara, were cold with fury. "Clara, darling, come inside. You're soaking wet." She walked toward them, each step measured and deliberate. "Mr. Creed, thank you for checking on her. She has these spells sometimes. So distressing." "She doesn't need to go back inside," Jonas said. Evelyn stopped. "I beg your pardon?" "She doesn't want to go back, and I don't think she should have to." The mask slipped for just a second. Evelyn's expression went hard before smoothing back into maternal concern. "Mr. Creed, I appreciate your concern, but this is a family matter. Clara is upset, but she'll be fine once she's home and rested." "The home where you lock her in the cellar?" The words hung in the air like a thrown blade. Evelyn's face went perfectly still. When she spoke, her voice was ice. "I don't know what lies Clara has been telling you, but I assure you—" "She hasn't told me anything. I saw it myself, 2 weeks ago, through the cellar window." People were gathering in the church doorway now, watching, listening. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. "You saw my stepdaughter being given a timeout for inappropriate behavior," Evelyn said, her voice carrying clearly. "A common disciplinary measure. If you find that objectionable, perhaps you should examine your own understanding of proper child rearing." "That wasn't discipline, that was cruelty." Mrs. Henderson pushed forward. "How dare you speak to Mrs. Hale that way? The woman is a saint taking in a troubled child." "She's not troubled. She's terrified." Jonas turned to face the growing crowd. "And every one of you knows something's wrong. You've all seen how quiet she is, how thin, how she flinches when people move too quickly. You know, you just don't want to admit it." The silence that followed was suffocating. "This is outrageous," Evelyn said, but her voice wavered slightly. "I've devoted years to caring for Clara, and this is how she repays me? By sending some drifter to spread vicious lies?" "I didn't send him," Clara said. Her voice came out stronger than she expected. "I didn't tell him anything. He just saw." "Saw what? A girl being disciplined? A girl whose own mother abandoned her, who's been nothing but difficult and ungrateful ever since?" Evelyn's mask was cracking, anger bleeding through. "I've given you everything, Clara. A home, an education, a future, and you humiliate me like this? You've given me 6 years in hell." The words came out before Clara could stop them. You've starved me and hit me and locked me away and convinced everyone I deserved it. You've made me disappear so completely that I don't even know who I am anymore. Gasps from the crowd. Evelyn's face went white. She's hysterical, Evelyn said quickly. This is exactly what I'm talking about. These episodes, these delusions. Show them your arms, Clara, Jonas said quietly. Clara's hands trembled as she pushed up her sleeves. The bruises were old, fading to yellow-green, but still visible. Finger marks where Evelyn had gripped too hard. Evidence that couldn't be explained away. Mrs. Patterson pressed a hand to her mouth. Will stared, his face gone pale. Even Mrs. Henderson looked uncertain. Those could be from anything, Evelyn said, but her voice had lost its confidence. Clara's always been clumsy, always hurting herself. I got these from you. Clara's voice was shaking, but clear. Tuesday afternoon, after Will left. You said I embarrassed you. You grabbed my arms and told me there would be consequences if I ruined my chances with him. That's not... I never... Evelyn looked around at the crowd, searching for support. She's lying. She's always been prone to dramatic stories. Ask her father. Ask anyone who knows her. Her father's never here, Jonas said. You made sure of that. And everyone who might have noticed, you made sure they saw exactly what you wanted them to see. Reverend Miller pushed through the crowd. Mrs. Hale, perhaps we should discuss this somewhere private. There's nothing to discuss. This man is a stranger making wild accusations, and my stepdaughter is having another one of her episodes. I'm taking her home. She reached for Clara's arm. Clara jerked back. Don't touch me. The words echoed in the churchyard. Evelyn's hand hung in the air, frozen. I'm not going home with you, Clara continued. I'm not going back to that house. I can't. Her voice broke. I'd rather die than go back. You see? Evelyn's voice rose, desperate now. This is exactly the kind of instability I've been managing for 6 years. She needs help, professional help. I've been trying to protect her, but clearly I've failed. The only thing you failed at was hiding it well enough. Jonas stepped beside Clara, and now everyone knows. But Clara could see the doubt in the crowd's faces, could see them wavering between what they'd heard and what they'd believed for 6 years. Evelyn's performance had been too good, too consistent. I think, Reverend Miller said carefully, that we should wait for Mr. Whitlock to return before making any decisions. He's Clara's father. This is ultimately his concern. My father won't believe me either, Clara said flatly. He never has. Nevertheless, he should be consulted. The Reverend looked uncomfortable. Until then, Mrs. Hale, perhaps Clara could stay with another family, just to allow everyone to calm down? Absolutely not. Clara is my responsibility. I won't have her spreading these lies to... She can stay with us. Mrs. Patterson stepped forward, her face troubled but determined. Just for a few days. Until her father comes home. Evelyn's expression went cold. You're taking the word of a hysterical girl and a stranger over mine? After everything I've done for this community? I'm not taking anyone's word over anyone else's, Mrs. Patterson said quietly. But those bruises are real, and Clara deserves a chance to speak to her father without feeling pressured. For a long moment, Evelyn said nothing. Clara could see her calculating, trying to find a way to regain control. But the crowd was watching now, really watching. The performance couldn't continue. Fine. Evelyn's voice was brittle. Take her. Let her tell her lies to whoever will listen. But when her father returns and sees what an ungrateful, manipulative child she is, don't say I didn't warn you. She turned and walked to her carriage with her head high, every line of her body radiating wounded dignity. Clara watched her go, feeling nothing but a hollow exhaustion. Come on, dear, Mrs. Patterson said gently, taking Clara's arm. Let's get you dried off and warm. The crowd began to disperse, people talking in low, urgent voices. Clara caught Will's eye as he passed. He looked stricken, confused. She couldn't bring herself to care. Jonas walked beside them to the Patterson carriage. You all right? Clara laughed, the sound edged with hysteria. I have no idea. That was brave, what you did. I didn't do anything. I broke down and you... She stopped. Why did you do that? Speak up like that? You could have just left. Could have, didn't want to. But why? Jonas was quiet for a moment. Because someone needed to, and no one else was going to. Mrs. Patterson helped Clara into the carriage. As they pulled away, Clara looked back at the church. Most people had gone inside, uncomfortable with the scene they'd witnessed. A few still stood in clusters, talking. The performance was over. The illusion shattered. But Clara had no idea what came next. At the Patterson house, Mrs. Patterson drew a hot bath and found Clara dry clothes. Left her alone to wash and change, giving her space to process. Clara sat in the steaming water and stared at the bruises on her arms. Physical proof of something everyone should have seen, but chose to ignore. She'd lived with evidence written on her body for years, but she'd learned to hide it so well that even she barely noticed anymore. When she finally emerged, dressed in borrowed clothes that hung loose on her frame, Mrs. Patterson had tea waiting. "I'm sorry," the older woman said quietly. "I should have seen, should have noticed." She's very good at hiding it, at making it look like something else. Still, "I'm sorry." Mrs. Patterson poured tea with shaking hands. "Your father, he's due back next week, I think." Clara nodded. "Wednesday or Thursday." "What do you think he'll say when he hears?" "I don't know. He's believed Evelyn for 6 years. I'm not sure why this would be different." But even as she said it, Clara felt a tiny flicker of something. Not hope, exactly, more like possibility. Maybe, with other people watching, with witnesses who'd seen the bruises and heard the accusations, maybe this time would be different. Or maybe not. Maybe Evelyn would spin this into another story about Clara's instability, her need for help, her tendency toward drama. Maybe by the time her father arrived, the town would be convinced that Clara had made the whole thing up. The thought made her feel sick. That evening, the Pattersons treated her with careful kindness. Their children stared when they thought she wasn't looking. Mr. Patterson seemed uncomfortable, avoiding direct conversation. Only Mrs. Patterson was openly warm, tucking Clara into the guest room like she was something fragile. Clara lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the house settle. Every creak made her tense. Every footstep in the hall made her heart race. She kept waiting for Evelyn to appear, to drag her back, to make this brief freedom disappear. But the night passed quietly. And when morning came, Clara was still there, still safe. For now. Jonas came by on Monday afternoon. Mrs. Patterson let him in, though she looked uncertain about it. "Just wanted to see how you're doing," he said, standing awkwardly in the parlor. Clara stopped. Couldn't finish the sentence. "I don't know." "That's fair." They sat in silence for a moment. Clara studied her hands, trying to find words for what she felt. Fear, relief, exhaustion, all of it tangled together. "What happens now?" she finally asked. "Your father comes home. He decides what's true. And if he doesn't believe me?" Jonas's expression was troubled. "Then we figure out something else." "There is no something else. I'm 16. I have no rights. Whatever he decides is final. Not if enough people stand with you. Mrs. Patterson saw those bruises. Other people heard what you said. That matters." "Does it?" Clara's voice was bitter. "Or will they all decide it's easier to believe Evelyn's version? That I'm troubled and she's the victim of false accusations?" "I don't know," Jonas admitted. "People believe what they want to believe, what's comfortable." "Then I'm going back. One way or another, I'm going back to that house." "Maybe, but at least now the truth is out there. People know. They can't unhear what you said, can't unsee those bruises. That changes things, even if you can't see how yet." Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to think that speaking up had mattered. But 6 years of experience told her otherwise. Told her that Evelyn always won, always found a way to twist reality into whatever shape she needed. Jonas left after a few more minutes of stilted conversation. Clara watched him go, feeling more alone than ever. The days crawled by. Tuesday, Wednesday. Thursday morning arrived with no word from her father. Clara spent the time helping Mrs. Patterson with small tasks, trying to be useful, trying not to think about what would happen when her father finally came home. Thursday afternoon, a telegram arrived. Mr. Whitlock would be home Friday evening. He requested that both Clara and Evelyn be present at the house to discuss the situation. Clara's hand shook so badly she could barely hold the telegram. "He's already decided. He's going to send me back." "You don't know that," Mrs. Patterson said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I do. I've known it for 6 years. He always chooses her, always believes her. That night, Clara barely slept. She kept running through scenarios, trying to find words that would make her father understand, trying to imagine a version of this conversation where he actually listened. But her imagination failed her. Every scenario ended the same way, with her father's disappointed expression, his quiet insistence that she was being dramatic, his decision to trust his wife over his daughter. Friday evening came too fast. Mrs. Patterson drove Clara to the house as the sun began to set. The familiar building looked different now, smaller, less threatening. Or maybe Clara was just different. Maybe speaking the truth aloud, even knowing the consequences, had changed something in her that couldn't be unchanged. Her father's carriage was already there. Clara climbed down from the Pattersons' wagon, her legs unsteady. "Do you want me to come in with you?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "No, thank you, but this is something I need to do alone." Clara walked to the door, opened it, stepped inside. Her father stood in the parlor, still wearing his traveling coat. He looked older than she remembered, tired. When he saw her, his expression was unreadable. "Clara." "Father." Evelyn emerged from the kitchen, her face carefully composed. "Clara, I'm so glad you're home. We've been terribly worried." The performance was starting again. Clara felt it settling over the room like a familiar weight, but then her father spoke, and his voice was different than she expected. "Sit down, both of you. We need to talk about what happened." And Clara realized with a jolt of something almost like fear that maybe, just maybe, the ending wasn't written yet. Clara sat in the chair her father indicated, her hands folded in her lap to hide their shaking. Evelyn settled onto the settee with practiced grace, her expression a careful blend of hurt and patience. The same performance Clara had watched for 6 years. The same mask that never slipped in front of witnesses. But her father didn't sit. He stood by the fireplace, one hand on the mantel, his face drawn. The silence stretched until Clara thought she might scream. "I received 3 letters this week," he finally said. "One from Reverend Miller, one from Caroline Patterson, and one from my wife." He looked at Evelyn. "They told very different stories." "Thomas, I can explain," Evelyn began. "I'm not asking for explanations yet. I'm asking for the truth." He turned to Clara. "And I want to hear it from you first. What happened at church last Sunday?" Clara's throat went dry. She'd imagined this conversation 100 times, but now that the moment had arrived, the words wouldn't come. Where did she even start? How did you summarize 6 years of careful cruelty in a way that sounded believable? "I couldn't breathe anymore," she said finally. "I was sitting there, pretending everything was fine, and I couldn't keep doing it. So I left. And Jonas Creed followed me. And he told everyone what he'd seen, about the cellar." Her father's jaw tightened. "The cellar where Evelyn says you were given a timeout for breaking her good china. That's what she told people. That's what she always tells people. Makes it sound reasonable. Discipline. Structure." Clara's voice was shaking now. "But it's not discipline when she leaves me down there for hours in the dark. When she slaps me hard enough to split my lip. When she—" "These are serious accusations, Clara. I know. Do you have proof? Beyond the word of some drifter passing through town?" The question landed like a blow. After everything, he still needed proof. Still couldn't just believe her. "The bruises on my arms," Clara said quietly. "Mrs. Patterson saw them. So did half the congregation. Evelyn says you got those from falling, that you've always been clumsy." "I got them from her grabbing me. Tuesday afternoon after Will left. She said I embarrassed her. She said there would be consequences if I ruined my chances with him." Evelyn made a soft sound of distress. "Thomas, This is exactly what I've been trying to tell you. She creates these elaborate stories. I've tried so hard to help her, but she's so deeply troubled. Let her finish." His voice was sharp enough that Evelyn went silent. Clara took a breath. "She's been doing this since you married her. The first year was fine because she was still establishing herself, making sure everyone liked her. But after that, it started small. Little criticisms, corrections, then bigger things. Locking my door at night, missing meals if I disrespected her, slaps that came faster and harder until I learned to stay quiet." "Why didn't you tell me?" "I tried, once, when I was 12. You weren't home more than 3 days that trip, remember? and she was always there, always listening. When I finally got you alone, she walked in before I could finish. That night, after you left again, she made sure I understood what happened to girls who lied about their stepmothers. Her father's face had gone pale. What did she do? Locked me in my room for 2 days, no food, no water, just enough to make sure I understood the consequences of speaking up. That's a lie, Evelyn said, her voice rising. Thomas, you can't possibly believe this. I've devoted myself to your daughter, given up my own life to care for her, and this is how she repays me? With vicious accusations? Then explain the bruises. She fell. She's always been accident-prone, you know that. And yes, sometimes I've had to be firm with her. She can be so difficult, so willful. But I've never been cruel, never. Clara's father looked between them, and Clara could see him struggling. 6 years of believing one story. 6 years of trusting his wife to manage the household while he traveled. 6 years of choosing not to see what was right in front of him. Show me your arms, he said to Clara. She pushed up her sleeves. The bruises had faded further, but they were still visible. 4 distinct finger marks on each arm, exactly where someone would grip if they were angry. Her father studied them for a long moment. Then he walked to Evelyn, held out his hand. Your hands. Thomas, this is absurd. Your hands, Evelyn. She held them out, trembling with what Clara recognized as carefully performed distress. Her father placed Evelyn's hands against Clara's arms, aligning the fingers with the bruises. They matched perfectly. The silence that followed was suffocating. Evelyn pulled her hands back as if burned. She could have made those herself, Evelyn said, but her voice had lost its certainty. To frame me. To get attention. You know how she's always craved attention since Margaret left. Don't! Clara's voice cut through the room like a blade. Don't talk about my mother. You have no right. I have every right. I'm the one who stayed. I'm the one who raised you when she abandoned. She didn't abandon me. You know she didn't. The words hung in the air. Clara hadn't meant to say them. Hadn't meant to voice the suspicion that had lived in the back of her mind for 6 years. But now it was out there, and she couldn't take it back. Her father turned to her slowly. What are you saying? I'm saying my mother would never have left me. Not willingly. Not without a fight. Clara looked at Evelyn. And you were there that night. You were the last person to see her. Evelyn's face went white. How dare you? How dare you suggest I had nothing to do with Margaret's disappearance? She was unstable. Everyone knew it. She ran off in the middle of the night. And that's not my fault. But you were here. In this house. Before you and Father were even courting. You came to visit, remember? To comfort the grieving family? Yes, I came to help. As any Christian neighbor would. And my mother disappeared that very night. That's coincidence. Nothing more. But Evelyn's voice shook. Thomas, you can't possibly believe this. Your daughter is having a breakdown. She needs help. Professional help. What I believe, Clara's father said quietly, is that I've been a fool. Evelyn stopped mid-sentence. I believed it was easier to let someone else manage things while I buried myself in work. Easier to trust you than to face what was happening in my own home. He looked at Clara, and for the first time in years she saw real emotion in his eyes. Not distant politeness. Actual pain. I chose not to see. And that's on me. Thomas, please. I want you out of this house by morning. The words dropped like stones. Evelyn stared at him, her carefully composed mask finally cracking. You can't be serious. I'm your wife. This is my home, too. This was never your home. It was a position, a role you played. His voice was hard now, final. And I'm done watching the performance. I gave you years. I gave you everything. I made this household run smoothly. I managed your daughter. I built relationships in this community that benefited your business. You abused a child under my roof and made me complicit through my absence. That ends now. Evelyn's expression shifted rapidly. Shock, fury, calculation. If I leave, everyone will know. Everyone will see what you've accused me of. Your reputation will be destroyed. Then it will be destroyed. I care more about my daughter than my reputation. Clara felt something crack open in her chest. Words she'd needed to hear for 6 years. Too late to fix what was broken, but maybe not too late to stop the breaking. Evelyn stood abruptly. You'll regret this, Thomas, both of you. When she shows her true nature, when you realize what an ungrateful, manipulative little "get out." The command was quiet but absolute. Evelyn stared at him for another moment, then swept from the room. Clara heard her footsteps on the stairs, sharp and angry. Doors slamming, drawers opening and closing. Her father sank into a chair, suddenly looking much older than his years. "I'm sorry." Clara didn't know what to say. Sorry didn't cover 6 years, didn't erase the scars, didn't undo the careful ways she'd learned to make herself disappear. "I should have seen," he continued, "should have paid attention, should have been here instead of running from the grief of losing your mother." "You didn't lose her. She was taken." He looked up sharply. "You really believe that? That Evelyn had something to do with it?" "I don't know. Maybe. She was here that night, and a week later she was bringing casseroles and offering to help manage the household. It seemed suspicious even then, but I was 10. What did I know?" The sheriff investigated. He found no evidence of foul play, because there was no body to investigate. Just a woman who vanished without a trace, leaving behind a daughter who loved her and needed her. Clara's voice cracked. And everyone decided it was easier to believe she ran away than to look too closely at what actually happened. Her father was quiet for a long time. Upstairs, Evelyn continued packing. The sounds were violent, angry. "What do you want to do?" he finally asked. "About everything. About your future." Clara hadn't thought that far ahead. Hadn't dared to imagine a future beyond surviving the next day. "I don't know. You could stay here with me. I'll be home more. I can't stay in this house." The words came out harder than she intended. "There's too much. Too many memories. I can't walk through these rooms without feeling..." She stopped. "I need to leave." "You're 16, Clara. Where would you go?" "I don't know. Anywhere. Somewhere that doesn't feel like a prison." Before her father could respond, Jonas Creed's voice came from the doorway. "She could come with me." They both turned. Jonas stood at the entrance to the parlor, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable but determined. "What are you doing here?" Clara's father demanded. "Came to make sure she was all right. Door was open." Jonas looked at Clara. "I'm heading west in a few days, into the mountains. There's mining camps up there, homesteads, places that need able hands. It's hard living, but it's honest. And it's far from here." "You're suggesting my 16-year-old daughter run off to the wilderness with a stranger?" Her father's voice rose. "Absolutely not. I'm suggesting she has a choice, something she hasn't had in 6 years." Jonas's voice stayed level. "I'm not asking her to run off with me. I'm offering her a way out, a chance to figure out who she is without this place crushing her into nothing. She's a child. She's a survivor who's stronger than either of us will ever be." Jonas looked at Clara again. "But it has to be her decision, not mine, not yours." Clara stared at him. The offer was insane, reckless, everything sensible people warned against. Running off with a man she barely knew to a place she'd never been, with no guarantees and no safety net. But staying meant living in this house, walking through rooms where Evelyn had hurt her, sleeping in a bed where she'd spent countless nights waiting for punishment, existing in a town that had watched her suffer and done nothing. "I need to think," she said. Her father opened his mouth to argue, but Jonas cut him off. "Take your time. I'll be at the Patterson place another 3 days. After that, I'm leaving whether you come or not." He left as quietly as he'd arrived. Clara's father stared at the empty doorway, his expression a mix of anger and helplessness. "You can't be considering this." "Why not?" "Because it's dangerous. Because you know nothing about him. Because I'm supposed to stay here and pretend everything's fine? Go back to being the grateful daughter who survived her stepmother's abuse and now has to rebuild under your watchful eye? That's not fair. None of this is fair." Clara's voice shook. "You get to feel guilty and apologize and promise to do better. I get to live with 6 years of scars that won't ever fully heal. So forgive me if I'm not interested in the comfortable option. Running away isn't healing. Neither is staying." Upstairs, a door slammed. Evelyn appeared at the top of the stairs with 2 packed bags, her face a mask of cold fury. "I'll be at the hotel," she announced. "My lawyer will be in touch about the divorce proceedings. And Thomas? I hope your daughter was worth destroying everything we built." She descended the stairs with her chin high, swept past them both, and left. The front door closing behind her felt final, absolute. Clara's father stared after her. She's right about one thing. This will destroy my reputation in town. I know. Business will suffer. People won't want to associate with a man who threw out his wife over his daughter's accusations. I'm sorry. He looked at her then, really looked. Don't be. I should have thrown her out years ago. Should have protected you instead of protecting myself from hard truths. The word should have meant more. Should have filled the hollow spaces inside her, but Clara just felt tired, exhausted down to her bones. I think I need to sleep, she said. Take my room. I'll sleep in the guest quarters. I can't sleep in your room. That's... Clara, I'm not letting you sleep in that room upstairs. Not tonight. Maybe not ever again. His voice was firm. Take my room. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. She was too tired to argue. She climbed the stairs, walked into her father's bedroom, a space she'd rarely entered that smelled of pipe tobacco and old leather. The bed was large and soft. She lay down fully clothed and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow she'd have to decide. Stay or go, safety or freedom. The known terror versus the unknown risk. But tonight, for the first time in 6 years, she fell asleep without listening for footsteps in the hall. Morning came too bright. Clara woke disoriented, forgetting where she was until memory caught up. The confrontation, Evelyn leaving, Jonas's offer. She found her father in the kitchen, attempting to make breakfast with the uncertain movements of someone unaccustomed to the task. I sent word to the cook that she needn't come today, he said. Thought we could use the privacy. They ate burned eggs and overdone bacon in silence. Clara's appetite was non-existent, but she forced herself to eat. Proof that she could, that no one would punish her for it. Have you decided? Her father asked finally. Not yet. I spoke with Caroline Patterson this morning. She said you'd be welcome to stay with them as long as you need. Give you time to recover, figure things out. That's kind of her. It is. Though I'd rather you stayed here. With me. He set down his fork. I know I don't deserve that. Know I've failed you in every way that matters. But I'm asking anyway. Clara studied her father's face, saw the guilt there, the genuine regret, but also the weariness. The man who'd chosen work over presence for so long that he'd forgotten how to be a father. If I stay, she said slowly, what would that look like? You traveling 3 weeks out of 4? Me rattling around this house alone? I'd change that. Stay local. Take smaller contracts. For how long? Until you get restless again? Until the next crisis pulls you away? He flinched. I deserve that. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to understand if this is real or just guilt talking. It's both. But mostly it's me realizing I'm about to lose the only family I have left. The honesty landed hard. Clara felt the weight of it, the truth that her leaving would cost him something real. But she also knew that cost wasn't her responsibility, wasn't something she owed him. I need to see something, she said. 30 minutes later, they stood in front of the cellar door. Clara hadn't been down there since the night Jonas saw her through the window. Her father opened the door, revealing the dark stairs descending into shadows. Show me where, he said quietly. Clara descended slowly, her father following. At the bottom, she pointed to the corner where she'd spent so many hours. The stone floor still bore faint stains, tears, blood from scraped knees, evidence of suffering no one had cared to see. Here, she said. This is where she sent me, sometimes for hours. Once overnight when I tried to tell you the truth. Her father's face had gone gray. The whole time I thought it was just discipline, time to reflect. She made it sound so reasonable. That was the point. Everything she did sounded reasonable when she explained it. That's what made it so effective. They stood in the cellar for a long moment. Then her father did something Clara didn't expect. He sat down in the corner where she used to sit, pressed his back against the cold stone wall. I'm sorry, he said again, and I know that's not enough. No, it doesn't fix anything. But I need you to hear it. I failed you, Clara, completely. Clara didn't respond, just watched him sit in the space of her suffering, trying to understand something he'd never have to experience. Finally, she spoke. I think I need to leave. Not forever, maybe, but for now. He looked up at her. With Jonas Creed? Maybe. I don't know yet. You barely know him. I barely know anyone. Evelyn made sure of that. Claire's voice was steady, but he's the only person who saw what was happening and actually said something, actually did something about it. That counts for something. It counts for one moment of decency. It doesn't mean he's trustworthy for a lifetime. I'm not planning a lifetime. I'm planning an escape. Her father stood, brushing dust from his trousers. And if I forbid it? If I say you're too young, too vulnerable? Then I'll leave anyway. You can't lock me in this house. Not after everything. The truth of it hung between them. He had no real authority anymore, had surrendered that through years of absence and willful blindness. Whatever happened next, it would be Clara's choice. They climbed out of the cellar. Her father locked the door behind them, and Clara knew neither of them would ever open it again. That afternoon, Clara walked to the Patterson ranch. Jonas was working on the far fence line, same steady rhythm she'd seen before. She watched him for a moment before calling out, "Can we talk?" He set down his tools, wiped sweat from his face. "Sure." They walked away from the house toward a small creek that cut through the property. The water was clear and cold, running fast from recent rains. "I want to know why you're offering this," Clara said. "Why you'd take on someone else's problems." Jonas picked up a flat stone, skipped it across the water. "I had a sister once, younger than me. She married a man who seemed decent enough. Nice house, good prospects, but he had a temper he saved for when no one else was watching." Clara went very still. "Took me 2 years to see it. 2 years of her making excuses. Wearing long sleeves in summer, flinching when he moved too fast." Jonas's voice was flat, emotionless. "By the time I understood what was happening, she didn't want help. Said she'd made her choice, said it was better than being alone." "What happened to her?" "She died. An accident, they called it. Fell down the stairs, broke her neck." He turned to look at Clara. "I didn't push then. Didn't force the issue. Thought I was respecting her choices. But all I did was watch her die slowly and do nothing about it. That wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? I saw. I knew. And I let it continue because it was easier than making waves." He picked up another stone. "So when I saw you in that cellar, I thought, here's a chance to not make the same mistake twice. I'm not your sister. No. But you're someone who needs a way out, and I happen to be heading somewhere far from here. Seems practical." Clara studied him. "Is that all this is? Practicality? Making up for past mistakes?" "Mostly." Jonas met her eyes. "But also you remind me of what my sister might have been if someone had helped her early enough. Strong, stubborn, surviving against odds that should have broken you." The honesty was startling. No flowery words, no pretense of nobility, just a man carrying his own grief, trying to do something that might matter. "It would just be survival," Clara said. "In the mountains. Nothing comfortable. Better than comfortable imprisonment. And when winter comes, when it's too hard and I slow you down, then we figure it out, together." Jonas shrugged. "Look, I'm not promising some fairy tale ending. I'm offering hard work, cold nights, and the chance to be far away from here. That's all." Clara looked at the water rushing past, heading somewhere she couldn't see, going forward because that was the only direction a river knew. "I'll come," she said. "When do we leave?" "Sunday morning, before dawn. Less chance of anyone trying to stop us. My father might try anyway." "Let him. He can't force you to stay." Jonas's voice was gentle. "This is your choice, Clara. No one else's." She nodded. The decision sat in her chest like something solid. Terrifying, but real. A step towards something unknown instead of away from something unbearable. They walked back to the main house in silence. Mrs. Patterson was hanging laundry, her expression knowing when she saw them together. "You're leaving with him," she said. Not a question. "Yes, ma'am." "I think that's probably wise, much as it worries me." Mrs. Patterson pinned up a sheet. "Your father won't like it." "I know. But you're doing it anyway." "I have to." Mrs. Patterson studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Come inside. We'll get you properly outfitted. You can't head into the mountains wearing Sunday dresses." The next 2 days passed in preparation. Mrs. Patterson provided sturdy clothes, boots that fit, supplies Clara would need. Her father came by twice, trying to change her mind. Both conversations ended the same way. with him understanding he had no power here, no authority to stop her. Saturday evening, Clara stood in the Pattersons' guest room, packing the small bag that would hold everything she owned. It wasn't much. A change of clothes, a few books, the photograph of her mother she'd hidden from Evelyn for 6 years. There was a knock at the door. Her father entered, looking older than she'd ever seen him. "I can't talk you out of this." "No." "Can I at least give you this?" He held out a leather pouch. "Money. Enough to get you started somewhere. Buy passage if you need it. Something." Clara took it. The weight was substantial, more money than she'd ever held. "Thank you. And this." He handed her a folded paper. "It's a letter, explaining that you have my permission to travel, to work, to make your own decisions, in case anyone questions your age." Clara unfolded it, read the careful words. Legal language giving her a kind of freedom most 16-year-olds didn't possess. It was inadequate and necessary all at once. "You're really doing this," her father said. "Running off with a stranger into the wilderness." "Yes. I can't protect you out there." "You couldn't protect me here either." The words were sharp but true. "At least out there, I'll know what I'm fighting." He flinched. "Fair enough." He stood there awkwardly, like he wanted to say something more but couldn't find the words. Finally, "I love you, Clara. I know I've done a poor job of showing it, but I do." "I know." Clara surprised herself by meaning it. "And maybe someday that'll be enough. But right now, I need distance more than I need love." He left shortly after. Clara finished packing, then lay down to sleep. But her mind raced, running through everything that could go wrong. Jonas could be lying. The journey could kill her. She might get halfway there and realize she'd made a terrible mistake, but staying felt like dying slowly. And Clara had done enough dying. Sunday morning arrived dark and cold. Clara dressed in the sturdy clothes Mrs. Patterson had provided. Wool trousers, a heavy shirt, boots meant for walking long distances. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the girl staring back. Good. She didn't want to be that girl anymore anyway. Jonas was waiting outside with 2 horses and basic supplies. He'd acquired a second mount somehow, along with bedrolls and provisions. "You ready?" he asked. Clara looked back at the Patterson house, then beyond it toward the town. Everything she'd known for 16 years, the good and the terrible, all mixed together. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." They rode out as the sun began to rise, heading west toward mountains that looked like teeth against the pale sky. Behind them, the town slowly woke, smoke rising from chimneys, people beginning their Sunday routines. Clara didn't look back. The first week nearly killed her, not from danger or violence, but from the simple, brutal reality of what survival actually meant. Clara had imagined hardship in abstract terms, cold, hunger, exhaustion, but the reality was specific and relentless. Blisters that turned her feet raw inside the new boots, muscles that screamed with every mile, a kind of bone-deep cold that no amount of layering could fully stop. They traveled mostly in silence, Jonas setting a pace that was steady but unforgiving. He didn't coddle her, didn't ask if she needed to rest or slow down. Just kept moving, trusting her to keep up or speak if she couldn't. Clara refused to speak. On the 3rd day, her horse threw a shoe. Jonas dismounted to examine the hoof, while Clara sat trembling with fatigue, trying not to let him see how close she was to collapsing. "We'll need to walk him to the next settlement," Jonas said. "Maybe 10 miles. 10 miles. Clara's legs already felt like they might give out, but she nodded and dismounted, taking the reins. They walked in silence until the sun began to set. Jonas finally called a halt near a stream, tying the horses while Clara sank to the ground and pulled off her boots. The blisters had burst. Her socks were spotted with blood. Jonas glanced over, his expression unreadable. "You should have said something." "Why? Would it have changed anything?" "No, but I'd have known you were tougher than you look." He built a fire while Clara soaked her feet in the freezing stream, biting back sounds of pain. When she returned to the fire, he handed her strips of cloth. "Wrap them. We've got another week of hard riding before we reach the camps." Clara wrapped her feet carefully, her hands shaking from cold and exhaustion. Jonas handed her jerky and hardtack, food that tasted like nothing but filled the hollow ache in her stomach. "You regretting it yet?" he asked. every minute. Good, means you're paying attention. Clara almost laughed. Almost. Is it supposed to get easier? Not easier. Different. Jonas poked at the fire. Your body will adapt. Learn what it can do, but it'll always be hard in some way. That's not very encouraging. Wasn't trying to be encouraging. Was trying to be honest. They slept on opposite sides of the fire, wrapped in bedrolls that did little against the cold. Clara lay awake for hours, every muscle aching, listening to the sounds of wilderness she'd never heard before. Things moving in the darkness, the wind through trees, her own ragged breathing. She thought about the cellar, about locked doors, and Evelyn's perfectly controlled cruelty. This was different. This pain came from effort, from movement, from choosing something hard instead of enduring something imposed. Jonas had been right about that much. It mattered where the pain came from, but it still hurt. The next morning, Clara could barely stand. Her feet were swollen, her legs stiff. Jonas took one look at her and adjusted the packs without comment, redistributing weight so her horse carried less. Can you ride? I'll manage. And she did, mile after painful mile, forcing her body to move when it wanted to quit. By the time they reached a small settlement that afternoon, Clara was half delirious with exhaustion. The blacksmith was a large man with kind eyes who reset the horse's shoe while making small talk with Jonas. Clara sat on a bench outside, too tired to care about anything except not moving. Your daughter? The blacksmith asked Jonas. No, friend. The man's eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't push, just finished the work, accepted payment, and wished them well. They rode out as the sun began to set. Jonas found a spot to camp near a rocky outcrop that provided some shelter from the wind. We'll rest here tomorrow, he said. Give you time to recover. I don't need... You do. I'm not carrying you when you collapse. Clara wanted to argue but couldn't find the energy. She ate mechanically, wrapped herself in the bedroll, and fell into sleep so deep it felt like drowning. She woke to sunlight and the smell of coffee. Jonas had a small pot balanced over the fire, along with something that looked like actual food instead of dried meat. Bought eggs and bacon in town yesterday, he said. Figured you'd earned something better than jerky. The meal was simple, but tasted like the best thing Clara had ever eaten. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, feeling strength seep back into her body. Thank you, she said. Jonas nodded. They spent the day resting, tending to the horses, preparing for the next leg of the journey. Clara rewrapped her feet, cleaned and mended her clothes, tried to repair some of the damage the past few days had inflicted. In the afternoon, Jonas taught her how to set snares for small game, how to read the land for water sources, how to move quietly through underbrush without leaving obvious trails. Why are you teaching me this? Clara asked. Because if something happens to me, you need to know how to survive on your own. The practicality of it was almost brutal. But Clara appreciated it more than false reassurance. This was how Jonas operated, preparing for the worst while hoping for something better. They resumed traveling the next morning. Clara's feet still hurt, but the pain was manageable now, familiar. Her body was beginning to adapt, just like Jonas said it would. The landscape changed as they climbed higher. More rocks, fewer trees, air that felt thinner, harder to breathe. At night, the cold was sharp enough to cut. On the 8th day, they crested a ridge and Clara saw the mining camp spread out below. Rough structures clustered around a creek, men moving between them like ants. The sound of pickaxes against rock echoed up the valley. That's it, Jonas said. That's where we're heading. Clara studied the camp. It looked temporary, impermanent, like something that could disappear as easily as it had appeared. What happens when the mine plays out? We move on, find the next camp, or we homestead if we find good land. Jonas glanced at her. Nothing's permanent out here. That's the point. They descended into the camp as the sun set. Men stopped working to watch them pass, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Clara kept her eyes forward, trying to look more confident than she felt. Jonas led them to a larger structure near the center of camp. A woman emerged, wiping her hands on an apron. She was maybe 40, with iron gray hair and a face that had seen every variation of hardship. Help you? She asked. Looking for work. And a place to stay. Jonas dismounted. Name's Jonas Creed. This is Clara. The woman's eyes flicked to Clara, taking in her age, her gender, the way she sat her horse like someone still learning. Don't have much use for girls here. This is mining country. She can work. Whatever needs doing. Can she now? The woman looked skeptical. What kind of work you done, girl? Clara met her eyes. Whatever I had to. Something shifted in the woman's expression. Not quite approval, but recognition. Name's Ruth. I run the boarding house and cook for the camp. You want a roof? You work for it. Fair wages, no charity. That clear? Yes, ma'am. Don't ma'am me makes me feel old. Ruth turned to Jonas. You vouch for her? I do. Then you're responsible if she causes trouble. I don't tolerate drama in my house. They settled into a small room at the back of the boarding house, just space enough for 2 bedrolls and their gear. It was cramped and basic, but it was shelter, and it was theirs. That first night, Clara lay awake listening to the sounds of the camp settling down. Men's voices carrying through thin walls, the creak of wood, the constant background noise of people living too close together. You all right? Jonas asked from the darkness. I don't know yet. That's fair. Clara rolled onto her side. Jonas, why didn't you correct her when she assumed we were together? Because it's easier than explaining the truth. And because out here, people don't ask too many questions as long as you pull your weight. But people will talk. Let them. We know what this is. That's what matters. Clara wasn't sure she knew what this was. Partnership, friendship, something neither of them had words for yet. But Jonas was right. It didn't matter what others thought. Only what was true between them. She fell asleep to that thought and woke before dawn to Ruth banging on the door. Up, breakfast won't cook itself. The work was brutal in its own way. Hauling water, chopping vegetables, scrubbing pots, serving meals to men who rarely looked her in the eye. Clara's hands cracked and bled. Her back ached from bending over the stove. But it was honest work, work that paid, work that no one could take away because she'd displeased them. Jonas found work in the mine, coming back each evening covered in dust and exhaustion. They'd eat together in silence, too tired for conversation, then collapse into sleep heavy enough to feel like oblivion. Weeks passed. Then a month. Clara's body changed, became leaner, harder, stronger. Her hands developed calluses thick enough to handle hot pots without flinching. She learned to move efficiently through the cramped kitchen, to judge cooking times by instinct, to manage Ruth's sharp tongue without taking it personally. Ruth was demanding but fair. She paid what she promised, expected excellence, and didn't tolerate excuses. Under her teaching, Clara learned skills she'd never needed in Evelyn's house: how to butcher a deer, preserve meat, make bread that could last a week. You're getting better, Ruth said one afternoon, watching Clara knead dough. Still slow, but better. Thank you. Wasn't a compliment, just observation. Ruth dumped flour into a bowl. You run away from something? Clara's hands stilled on the dough. What makes you think that? You've got the look, like you're waiting for something to catch up with you. Ruth didn't look up from her work. Most people out here are running from something. That's why they come to the middle of nowhere to break rocks for pennies. And you? Me? I ran from a husband who thought his fists made better arguments than his words. Ruth's voice was matter-of-fact. Been out here 15 years. He's probably dead by now. Don't much care either way. The casual way she said it startled Clara. Like violence was just another fact of life. Something to escape and move past. Does it get easier? Living with what happened? Ruth finally looked up. No, but you get stronger. Strong enough that the past doesn't own you anymore. Takes time, though. And work. She gestured at the dough. Keep kneading. You're not done yet. Clara worked the dough until her arms burned. Around her, the kitchen hummed with activity. Ruth preparing stew, another woman washing vegetables, the constant heat from the stove making everything shimmer. This wasn't the life Clara had imagined. Wasn't comfortable or easy or safe. But it was hers. Built by her own hands. Earned by her own effort. And for the first time in 6 years, no one could take it away because of a broken plate or a wrong word. Winter came hard and fast. The camp transformed into something bleaker, snow piling higher than Clara's waist, temperatures that made breathing painful. Men stopped working the mine during the worst storms, huddling in the boarding house for warmth. Clara learned to cook for crowds. stretching supplies that seemed impossibly meager into meals that somehow fed everyone. She learned to melt snow for water, to keep fires burning through the night, to recognize the signs of frostbite before it turned serious. And she learned that survival in winter was its own kind of battle, constant, exhausting, requiring vigilance every moment. 2 months into winter, Jonas fell ill. It started as a cough, then developed into a fever that left him shaking and delirious. Clara moved him to their room, piled on every blanket they owned, and tried every remedy Ruth could suggest. Nothing worked. The fever climbed higher. Jonas's breathing turned ragged, wet-sounding. Clara sat beside him through 3 days and nights, changing cold compresses, forcing water between his cracked lips, watching him fight something she couldn't see. On the 4th night, she thought he would die. His breathing had become so shallow, she had to lean close to confirm he was still alive. His skin burned under her hands. "Don't you dare," she whispered. "Don't you dare leave me here, not after everything." Jonas's eyes fluttered open, unfocused, glassy with fever. "Sister?" "No, it's Clara." "Sorry, so sorry I didn't—" He broke off coughing, the sound rattling his whole body. Clara held him while he coughed, supporting his weight, whispering words that were probably lies. "You're going to be fine. The fever's breaking. You just need to rest." But the fever wasn't breaking. If anything, it was getting worse. Ruth appeared in the doorway. "How is he?" "Bad. There's a doctor 2 camps over, but in this snow it'd take a day to reach him, another day back. He might not have that long." Clara looked at Jonas's face, flushed and sweating despite the cold. "Then I'll have to bring the fever down myself." "You know how?" "No, but I'll figure it out." Ruth studied her for a moment. "You love him?" The question caught Clara off guard. "I don't know. Maybe. But that's not why I'm doing this." "Then why?" "Because he saw me when no one else would. Because he spoke up when everyone else stayed silent. Because I owe him." Clara met Ruth's eyes. "And because if he dies, it should be for a better reason than a fever. I didn't fight hard enough." Ruth nodded slowly. "All right then, let's fight." They worked through the night, cold baths to bring down the fever, teas made from herbs Ruth swore would help, prayers neither of them quite believed in. Clara stayed beside Jonas every moment, talking to him even when he couldn't respond, anchoring him to consciousness through sheer force of will. Just before dawn, the fever finally broke. Jonas opened his eyes, fully aware for the first time in days. "Clara? I'm here." "How long?" 4 days. He tried to sit up, fell back weakly. "You should have let me go. Would have been easier." "Probably, but I don't do easy anymore." Clara helped him drink water. "You taught me that." Over the next week, Jonas slowly recovered. He was weak, shaky, but the worst had passed. Clara continued working in the kitchen while checking on him between meals, making sure he ate, forcing him to rest when he tried to push too hard. "You're worse than Ruth," he grumbled one afternoon. "Ruth's keeping you alive. I'm keeping you from being stupid about it. Different jobs." "I can take care of myself." "You almost died because you wouldn't admit you were sick until it was nearly too late. So no, you can't." Clara set down a bowl of soup. "Eat, and don't argue." Jonas ate, but he was smiling. "You've changed." "Had to." "You were right about that. Survival changes you." "Into what?" Clara considered the question. "Someone I don't recognize yet, but someone stronger than who I was. That girl in the cellar, she was already strong. She just didn't know it." "Maybe, but she needed this." Clara gestured at the rough room, the simple bowl of soup, the snow visible through the window. Needed to leave everything behind and rebuild from nothing. Needed to prove she could. "And have you? Proved it?" Clara thought about the past months, the pain of those first weeks, the exhaustion of learning new skills, the terror of watching Jonas nearly die and finding the strength to fight for him. She'd done things she never imagined possible, become someone she never thought she could be. "Yes," she said, "I think I have." Spring came slowly, reluctantly. Snow melted in patches, revealing muddy ground and the possibility of movement again. The mine reopened. Men returned to work with the desperate energy of people who'd been idle too long. Clara had saved most of her wages over the winter. The money her father had given her remained untouched in its leather pouch. Together, it was enough for something more permanent, something that belonged to her. She approached Ruth one morning while preparing breakfast. "I want to buy land, build something of my own. Do you know how that works?" Ruth looked up from her coffee. "Homesteading? File a claim, prove you can work the land, build a structure. After 5 years, it's yours." 5 years? Government land isn't free. You pay with time and work. Ruth studied Clara's face. "You thinking of leaving?" "Not leaving, just moving forward, building something that can't be taken away." "Smart. This camp won't last forever. Mine'll play out in another year, maybe 2. Then everyone scatters." Ruth refilled her coffee. "There's good land about 20 miles east. Creek runs through it. Decent timber. I looked at it once myself, before I got too old for that kind of work. Would you show me?" 3 days later, Ruth took Clara to see the land. It was everything she'd described, a valley with a clear stream surrounded by hills that would provide shelter from wind. The soil looked rich. The trees were straight and strong. Clara stood in the center of the valley and felt something settle in her chest. This could be hers, not through inheritance or marriage or someone else's generosity, through her own work, her own will. "What do you think?" Ruth asked. "I think it's perfect." Perfect's a strong word. It'll be hard work. Building a cabin, clearing land, surviving alone until you get established. "Who said I'd be alone?" Clara turned to find Jonas approaching on horseback. He dismounted, surveyed the land with a practiced eye. "Good water source, timber for building, game trails along the ridge." He looked at Clara. "You planning to homestead?" "I am. You interested in helping?" "Might be. What's the arrangement?" Clara had thought about this carefully over the winter. "Partners. Equal shares in whatever we build. We work together until the claim is proven, then decide what comes next." "No promises beyond that?" "No promises. Just honest work and fair dealing." Jonas extended his hand. "Deal." They shook on it while Ruth watched with an expression that might have been approval. "You'll need supplies, tools, enough food to last until you can hunt and plant. That's not cheap." "I have money," Clara said, "and I can work for more if needed." "Then I'd suggest you spend the next few months preparing. File your claim, gather supplies, learn what you'll need to know. Come fall, you can start building." Clara nodded. The timeline made sense. No rushing into something unprepared, just careful, methodical planning toward a goal that finally felt achievable. Over the next months, Clara and Jonas worked with single-minded focus. They filed the homestead claim, purchased tools and supplies, studied everything they could about building, farming, surviving self-sufficiently. Ruth taught Clara to preserve food, to recognize medicinal plants, to manage livestock. Jonas learned carpentry from an old-timer in camp who'd built half the structures there. He practiced on small projects until his joints were tight and his measurements precise. They were building toward something, not a dream. Dreams were too fragile. A plan, a future they could touch and shape with their own hands. Summer arrived hot and bright. The mining camp bustled with activity. Clara continued working in Ruth's kitchen, saving every penny, preparing for the day they'd leave for good. One afternoon, a stranger rode into camp, well-dressed, clean-shaven, riding a horse too expensive for these parts. He asked around, clearly looking for someone. Clara was hauling water when he approached. "Excuse me, miss. I'm looking for Clara Whitlock. You know where I might find her?" Clara's stomach dropped. "Who's asking?" "My name is William Crawford. I was acquainted with Clara back in town. Her father hired me to find her." Will, the nephew who'd courted her under Evelyn's watchful eye. Clara set down the water buckets carefully. "Why?" "He wants to know she's safe. Wants to help if she needs it." Will studied her face. "It's you, isn't it, Clara?" There was no point denying it. "Yes. Thank heaven. Your father's been worried sick. When you disappeared, he thought—" Will stopped. "May we speak privately?" They walked to the edge of camp. Will kept glancing at her, clearly shocked by her appearance. The fine dresses replaced with work clothes, the carefully arranged hair now in a simple braid, the soft hands turned hard with calluses. "You look different," he finally said. I am different. Your father wants you to come home. He's divorced Evelyn. She's left town entirely. The house is yours if you want it. Clara stared at him. He divorced her? As soon as the legal proceedings could be arranged. It caused quite a scandal, but he didn't care. He just wants you home and safe. Home. The word felt foreign. That house had never been home, just a prison with comfortable furniture. I'm not going back, Clara said, but your father means well, I'm sure. But I have a life here, land I'm claiming, work I'm building toward. I'm not giving that up. Will looked genuinely confused. Clara, you're living in a mining camp in the middle of nowhere. You're working as a cook. Your father can give you so much more. Education, society, opportunities. He can give me what he thinks I should want. That's not the same thing. Clara met Will's eyes. I appreciate you coming all this way, but tell my father I'm fine. Better than fine, I'm free. You call this freedom? Hauling water and scrubbing pots? I call it earning my own way. Building something that belongs to me. Not having to shrink myself to fit someone else's expectations. Clara's voice was steady. That's freedom, even if it doesn't look like what you think it should. Will was quiet for a long moment. He'll be disappointed. He'll survive. We both will. Clara turned back toward camp. Safe travels, Will. She walked away before he could respond. Behind her, she heard him mount his horse and ride out, taking news back to a world that felt increasingly distant. That evening, Clara told Jonas about the visit. He listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. You could go back, he said when she finished. Take the house, the money, build something easier. I could, but I won't. Why not? Because easy isn't what I need. I need to know I can survive on my own terms, that I'm not dependent on anyone's charity or goodwill or guilt. Clara looked at the rough cabin they'd started building on weekend trips to their land. That's worth more than any house. Jonas nodded slowly. Then we'd better finish building before winter. They worked with renewed urgency through late summer and fall. The cabin took shape, rough but solid, built to withstand mountain winters. They cleared a small field for planting, set snares, hunted and preserved meat for the coming cold. By the time the first snow fell, they were ready. The cabin had a roof, walls chinked against wind, a stone fireplace that drew properly. Their supplies were stored and organized. They'd filed all necessary paperwork for the claim. They were homesteaders now, partners building something from nothing. That first winter was harder than the one in camp. The isolation was profound, just the two of them against weather that seemed determined to kill them. Clara learned to manage fear when Jonas was sick again, though less seriously this time. She learned to hunt when supplies ran low. She learned that strength wasn't about never being afraid, but about acting despite fear. And she learned that Jonas was right. They figured it out together. Spring came again, and with it the first planting. Clara worked soil that had probably never been tilled, planting seeds Ruth had given her with instructions written in careful script. She didn't know if anything would grow, but she tried anyway. By summer, the garden was thriving. Not perfectly, some plants died, some were eaten by animals, but enough survived to count as success. Clara stood in the middle of her small field and felt pride so fierce it nearly overwhelmed her. She'd done this, built this, created something living from dirt and seeds and stubborn determination. Other homesteaders began settling nearby. A few families, a couple of single men, people looking for the same thing Clara had found, space to build a life on their own terms. They helped each other with large projects, shared tools and knowledge, formed the skeleton of a community. One family had a daughter near Clara's age. Sarah was quiet and capable, with hands as scarred as Clara's, and a similar wariness around strangers. They became friends slowly, built on shared work and few words. You ran from something, Sarah said one day while they were mending fence. So did you. Yeah. Sarah hammered a nail. My father, he was... She stopped. It doesn't matter what he was. I'm here now. That's all that matters. They worked in comfortable silence. Two girls who'd learned survival through necessity, building futures from the wreckage of their pasts. Years passed. Clara turned 18, then 19, then 20. The homestead proved itself through 5 seasons of work. The land became legally hers. She expanded the cabin, added a barn, bought livestock with money earned from selling surplus crops. Jonas built his own cabin a half-mile away, claiming adjacent land. They remained partners, working together on big projects, helping each other through hard times, but maintaining separate lives. It was an arrangement that suited them both. People occasionally asked if they'd marry. Clara always said no. What they had was better than marriage. It was partnership without ownership, commitment without obligation. They'd chosen each other freely and could unchoose just as freely. That freedom made the choice mean more. On Clara's 21st birthday, Ruth visited. She'd left the mining camp when it closed, was living in a small town 50 miles away. "You've done well," Ruth said, surveying the homestead. "Better than most." "I had good teachers." "You had determination. The teaching was easy. You did the hard part." Ruth handed Clara a package wrapped in cloth. "Brought you something." Inside was a thick journal, bound in leather. The pages were blank, waiting. "Thought you might want to write it down," Ruth said. "Your story, how you got from there to here." Clara ran her fingers over the empty pages. "Why?" "Because stories matter. Because other girls might need to know it's possible. That you can survive the worst and build something better." Ruth's voice was gruff. "And because I want to read it when you're done." That night, Clara sat by lamplight and opened the journal. She thought about where to start. The cellar seemed too obvious, the church too dramatic. Instead, she started with a question. What does it mean to be strong? For years, she'd thought strength meant endurance, the ability to withstand pain without breaking. But she'd learned something different out here. Strength was choosing to leave, choosing to build, choosing to become something new instead of remaining broken. Strength was the daily work of survival, the small victories that added up to a life. She wrote late into the night, words pouring onto pages like water finding its level. She wrote about Evelyn and the cellar and 6 years of careful cruelty, about Jonas and the moment someone finally saw, about the journey west and winter in the mining camp and nearly losing Jonas to fever. She wrote about learning to be strong not through endurance but through action, through choosing again and again to keep building despite every reason to quit. When she finally set down the pen, dawn was breaking. Clara walked outside and looked at the land she'd claimed, the cabin she'd built, the garden already showing signs of spring growth. This was hers, not because someone gave it to her, not because she married into it or inherited it, because she'd worked for it, fought for it, refused to let anyone, including herself, convince her she couldn't. Jonas emerged from his cabin and walked over, coffee in hand. "You were up late." "Writing." "Oh, the journal Ruth gave you?" "Yeah." "What are you writing about?" Clara thought about the question. Survival, strength, how I got from being that girl in the cellar to this. She gestured at the homestead. "And how did you?" "By refusing to die quietly, by accepting help when it was offered, by learning that strength isn't about never needing anyone, it's about knowing the difference between dependence and partnership." Jonas nodded. "That's a good answer." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb over the eastern hills. A new day. Another chance to build, to grow, to prove that survival wasn't just about staying alive. It was about becoming someone worth being. "I'm thinking of teaching," Clara said suddenly. "Other women who end up out here running from something. Show them what we learned. How to homestead, to survive, to build something that can't be taken away." "You'd be good at that." "You think?" "I know. You're living proof it's possible." Jonas finished his coffee. "When do you want to start?" "Soon, once I finish the journal. Once I've got the story down properly." Clara smiled. "Once I figure out how to explain that the girl who hid in cellars became someone who teaches others not to hide." "You don't need to explain it. You just need to tell the truth. The rest will figure itself out." That summer, Clara began teaching. The first student was a woman named Marie, who'd escaped a husband determined to control every aspect of her life. She arrived at the homestead thin and frightened, flinching at sudden movements. Clara recognized herself in that flinch. She taught Marie everything: how to plant and harvest, how to preserve food, how to build structures that wouldn't collapse in winter. But more than that, she taught her that survival was possible, that strength could be learned, that the person you were didn't have to be the person you remained. Marie stayed for 6 months, then filed her own homestead claim on land nearby. Other women followed. Some stayed briefly learning basics before moving on. Others settled permanently, forming a network of women who'd all run from something and found each other in the wilderness. Clara's homestead became known as a place where women could rebuild, where the past didn't matter as much as the future you were willing to work for. On her 25th birthday, Clara sat on her porch and reread the journal she'd filled, the story of a girl who'd learned to disappear and then learned to be impossible to ignore. It wasn't a perfect story, full of false starts and mistakes and moments she wasn't proud of. But it was honest, and it was hers. Jonas joined her, older now but still steady. "You going to publish that?" "Maybe. Ruth thinks I should." "What do you think?" Clara looked at the journal. "I think it might help someone. That's enough reason to try." 6 months later, the journal was published by a small press willing to take a chance on an unknown homesteader's memoir. It didn't sell many copies at first, but the ones it did sell mattered. Letters arrived from women who'd read it and recognized themselves in Clara's story. Women who found the courage to leave. Women who needed to know survival was possible. Clara answered every letter personally, offered advice where she could, extended invitations to her homestead when appropriate. Built a network of women helping women, all of them survivors in their own ways. Years passed. The homestead thrived. Clara's reputation grew, not as a victim who'd overcome, but as a woman who'd built something meaningful from the ruins of her past. She became someone others looked to for guidance, for strength, for proof that rebuilding was possible. And through it all, she never forgot the cellar. Never forgot what it felt like to be small and trapped and convinced escape was impossible. She carried those memories not as wounds, but as reminders of where she'd been, how far she'd come, and why the work of helping others mattered. One autumn afternoon, a letter arrived from her father. She hadn't heard from him in years, though she'd sent occasional updates through Will. The letter was brief. He was dying. Cancer, the doctor said. He wanted to see her one last time. Not to ask forgiveness. He knew better than that. Just to see the woman his daughter had become. Clara read the letter twice, then set it aside. She thought about ignoring it, about letting him die without the closure he sought. It would be fair, just. But she'd learned that holding on to anger was its own kind of prison, and she'd worked too hard to be free. She made the journey back to town 3 weeks later. The place looked smaller than she remembered. Familiar faces had aged. The church still stood with its white steeple. The house where she'd grown up looked tired, neglected. Her father lay in the same bed where he'd slept through years of his daughter's suffering. He looked ancient now, ravaged by illness. "Clara," he said when he saw her. "You came." "I did." "You look—" He struggled for words. Strong, capable, like someone who could survive anything. "I learned how, eventually." They talked for an hour. He asked about her life, her homestead, the work she did teaching other women. She answered honestly, but without embellishment. These were facts, not stories meant to impress or hurt. Before she left, he took her hand. "I'm sorry. For all of it. For not seeing. For not protecting you." Clara looked at their joined hands. His grip was weak, trembling. "I know. Can you forgive me? I'm working on it. Some days are easier than others." She met his eyes. "But I've built a good life despite everything, and that matters more than forgiveness." He died 2 weeks later. Clara didn't attend the funeral. She'd said what needed saying. Anything else would have been performance. She returned to her homestead and her work, to the women who depended on her teaching, to the land she'd claimed and the life she'd built. Jonas found her that evening, sitting on the porch watching the sunset. "You all right?" he asked. "Yeah, I am." Clara stretched out her legs. "It's strange. I thought seeing him would hurt more, or maybe less, but it just was. He was dying. I said goodbye. Now it's done. That simple? Nothing's that simple, but sometimes things end without big dramatic moments. Sometimes they just end." Jonas settled into the chair beside hers. "Your father leave you anything?" "The house. Some money. I'm selling it all and putting the proceeds into a fund for women who want a homestead but can't afford the startup costs. He'd probably approve of that. Maybe. But I'm not doing it for his approval, Clara smiled. I'm doing it because it's useful, because it helps, because I can. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set. 20 years since Clara had first fled into the night with Jonas. 20 years of building, surviving, becoming someone unrecognizable from that frightened girl in the cellar. She'd claimed her life with her own hands, shaped it through will and work and the stubborn refusal to let cruelty define her. And in doing so, she'd become exactly what Evelyn always feared, someone impossible to silence, someone whose story would outlast the lies. Clara never saw Evelyn again. Heard rumors occasionally that she'd remarried, that she'd moved east, that she'd died alone and unmourned. Clara didn't know which stories were true, didn't particularly care. Evelyn was just another ghost now, one Clara had long since stopped being haunted by. What mattered was this: the sunset over mountains she'd learned to call home, the garden that would need harvesting tomorrow, the woman arriving next week who needed teaching, the journal sitting on her desk, recording it all for whoever might need the story. Clara had survived. More than that, she'd lived. Built something meaningful from nothing, became someone worth being. And that, she thought as the last light faded from the sky, was victory enough.